In a land as vast and ancient as China, some places defy even the wildest imagination, where mountains rise not just as peaks of stone, but as living legends cloaked in mist, mystery, and myth. This is not the China of skyscrapers and superhighways, but a forgotten realm of sacred ridges, dragon-shaped cliffs, cloud sea forests, and ancient temples hidden deep within nature's grasp. In this cinematic journey, we'll travel far from the tourist trails and into the heart of China's most surreal and breathtaking mountain landscapes. Places so unreal they feel like whispers from a dream, carved into the earth by gods, spirits, and time itself. But before we continue, subscribe to the channel and like the video. Nestled between the provinces of Hunan and Henan lies Mount Mang, or Mengshan, a mountain range that breathes with the rhythm of ancient forests and cloud-kissed ridges, a place where mist never fully lifts and the line between earth and sky feels permanently blurred. This majestic formation, lesser known than many of its famed siblings across China, is a living relic of the deep, natural soul of central China. Rich in biodiversity, steeped in folklore, and layered with geological and botanical significance, Mount Mang is more than a mountain. It's a breathing, blooming entity that encapsulates the hidden beauty of inland China. The physical features of Mount Mang are defined by thick, forested ridgelines that wind like a dragon's back through the transitional zone where the Yangtze River basin starts to flirt with the temperate plains of the north. Rising to altitudes that make it prominent but not overwhelmingly high, the mountain isn't known for brutal peaks or sharp summits. Instead, it's renowned for its serenity, its undulating silhouettes coated in green, and the dense biodiversity that clings to its slopes. In spring and summer, the entire mountain bursts into a riot of life. Ferns unfurl in the underbrush, wild orchids bloom in secret alcoves, and ancient trees, some more than 1,000 years old, cast long, dappled shadows over moist forest floors. Botanically, Mount Mang is considered one of the richest forest reserves in all of central China. It serves as a transitional ecological corridor between subtropical and temperate zones, which allows it to host an impressive variety of plant and animal species. Over 3,000 species of plants have been documented here, including rare rhododendrons, magnolias, and wild ginkgo biloba. The mountain's diverse flora supports a delicate network of fauna. Clouded leopards, golden pheasants, and elusive forest musk deer make their homes in the shadows of these trees. Rare amphibians and insect species live in hidden brooks and on moss-covered rocks, many of which remain largely unstudied by modern science. But beyond its ecological value, Mount Mang has long held cultural and spiritual significance. Since the Tang and Song dynasties, monks and hermits sought refuge in its misty hollows, founding temples and meditation caves where the echoes of chanting still seem to hang in the fog. Ancient stone stairways, barely visible under thick moss, snake through the forest like forgotten veins leading to secluded shrines. The Taoist and Buddhist structures here, though often modest, radiate a unique spiritual gravity. Solitary pagodas sit in perfect silence among pine-covered slopes, and stone inscriptions etched into the mountainside speak of pilgrims and scholars who passed through long centuries ago. Legend has it that Mount Mang was once home to an immortal who watched over the mountain's animals and trees, punishing those who desecrated the forest and rewarding those who honored it. Locals still tell stories of travelers who went astray in the fog and were guided back by glowing lights or mysterious animal spirits. There are places along the ridge where the mist thickens suddenly, curling like living smoke, and these areas are considered spiritually potent. Locals say they are the breathing spots of the mountain, places where it exhales its wisdom into the air. Despite its splendor, Mount Mang remains relatively untouched by mass tourism. Unlike the overrun peaks of Huangshan or the heavily photographed Wulingyuan, Mengshan maintains a quiet, sacred atmosphere. Conservation efforts have been slow but deliberate, balancing the need for ecological protection with the region's growing desire for sustainable ecotourism. Today, carefully maintained wooden pathways offer access to select areas of the mountain, while the vast majority of its terrain remains wild and inaccessible, a living museum of biological and geological time. The most frequented area of Mount Mang is within the Mengshan National Forest Park in Hunan, which includes deep ravines, waterfalls hidden under hanging vines, and viewing platforms that open up to jaw-dropping panoramas of an ocean of trees stretching toward the horizon. This park is home to the famous Great Golden Eagle Valley, named not for the presence of eagles, though they do soar here, but for the golden hue that the valley takes on during sunrise and autumn foliage season. Here, the play of light and mist transforms the landscape into something otherworldly. It's not hard to understand why ancient poets wrote of immortals descending from the heavens to bathe in its streams. In autumn, when the leaves turn shades of crimson and gold, Mount Mang becomes a living painting. The crisp air carries the scent of pine needles and damp earth, and the crunch of dried leaves underfoot seems to echo with the memories of generations long past. Even then, the silence of the mountain is unbroken except by the wind and the occasional cry of a hawk overhead. Visitors often remark on a palpable sense of timelessness, a suspension from the modern world that allows for a rare and quiet communion with nature. And yet, for all its tranquility, Mount Mang is a mountain of contrasts. It embodies the tension between wildness and sanctity, between the ecological chaos of life and the spiritual desire for stillness. To visit Mount Mang is not merely to see a mountain, it is to be enfolded by one, to walk among its spirits, breathe its green breath, and be gently reminded of how small, and yet how deeply connected, we truly are in the vast web of life. As we move southward into the ethereal landscapes of Guangxi, we arrive at Mount Damingshan, a place that seems to have been sculpted not just by the slow hands of geological time, but by the imagination of ancient poets dreaming of paradise. Towering high above the quilted karst valleys below, Mount Daming is not merely a peak. It is a subtropical cathedral of mist, cascading water, and green abundance. Revered for its lush biodiversity, its plunging waterfalls, and its sweeping views over some of China's most iconic limestone formations, this mountain is a hidden sanctuary suspended between earth and sky. Mount Daming is located within the Damingshan National Nature Reserve, nestled near the border of Guangxi and Guangdong provinces. Though it shares the same overarching karst geology that defines much of southern China, it elevates this terrain, literally and metaphorically. By rising sharply above the surrounding landscape, its slopes cloaked in thick, ever-moist subtropical rainforest. The air here is heavy with humidity, fragrant with the scent of orchids, wild ginger, and blooming magnolia. Every square meter of earth seems to be claimed by mosses, lichens, ferns, or flowering shrubs. The trees drip with epiphytes. Vines wrap ancient trunks like ceremonial ribbons. It is a place of relentless, overwhelming growth. What sets Mount Daming apart from many of its southern peers is the elevation. The peak itself rises to over 1,700 meters, around 5,600 feet, creating vertical ecological zones that host different biological communities depending on altitude. At the lower levels, dense forests filled with giant bamboo groves and broadleaf evergreens dominate the scene. Climb higher, and the vegetation shifts. Mountain laurels, rare azaleas, and cloud forest species emerge, more adapted to misty, cooler air. In the highest ridges, moss-covered rocks and stunted, twisted trees cling to life in the swirling fog, reminding visitors of how harsh and pure mountain existence can be. This gradient of ecosystems contributes to Damingshan's status as one of southern China's most biodiverse regions. Over 2,000 species of plants have been identified here, including endangered medicinal herbs and endemic orchids that grow nowhere else on Earth. The mountain is also a refuge for rare and threatened wildlife. Black-throated laughing thrushes flit through the canopy, silver pheasants flash their long tails through the underbrush, and on very rare occasions, the elusive clouded leopard may be seen slipping like a ghost between the shadows. And then there are the waterfalls, some of the most beautiful in all of Guangxi. Because Damingshan receives high levels of rainfall throughout the year, its slopes are continually carved and refreshed by streams, rivulets, and crashing torrents. The most famous among them is the Longtan waterfall, which plummets from a sheer cliff in a single, uninterrupted drop that seems to fall straight from the clouds. On misty mornings, this waterfall appears to vanish halfway down, the lower half swallowed by vapor, giving the illusion that it pours endlessly into the sky. The sound of it, deep, thundering, and constant, is a natural hymn that fills the forest. Along its descent, water gathers in crystalline pools surrounded by ferns and flowering trees, making it a spiritual oasis as well as a visual one. Trails through Mount Daming are more rustic than in many of China's better-known scenic spots. While there are designated paths and stone steps in the main reserve areas, much of the mountain remains raw and lightly trodden. This makes it a favorite among more adventurous hikers and botanists, who come not just for the views but to disappear into the jungle-thick wilderness, to discover hidden glades and secret clearings that still echo with primal silence. One such path leads to the famous Cloud Forest Ridge, a high point where hikers often find themselves walking through a floating world. Thin clouds drifting waist-high across the ridgeline, sunlight filtering through in golden shafts, the forest whispering in the wind like a living thing. Culturally, Daimingshan has long been associated with Taoist and Buddhist thought. Though not as saturated with temples as some of China's more overtly religious mountains, its spiritual essence is felt in its seclusion, its harmony, and its sheer sense of permanence. Local legends tell of sages who disappeared into these forests, never to be seen again, choosing a life of meditation among birdsong and water rather than returning to the bustle of the mortal world. On quiet mornings, the fog rolls in thick, and the landscape becomes otherworldly. Trees dissolve into mist, and even your own footsteps seem to fade. It's in these moments that the mountain seems to blur the line between the natural and the divine. There's also a fascinating interaction between the mountain and the region's traditional ethnic cultures. Guangxi is home to many Zhuang and Yao minority villages, and the forested valleys surrounding Daimingshan are rich in their customs. Herbalists still journey into the forest to gather traditional medicines, speaking of the mountain as a teacher and protector. Folk songs reference the waterfalls as places of romance and legend, while rituals and offerings are made at sacred stones and springs believed to house forest spirits. Despite its richness, Mount Daiming remains largely off the mainstream tourist trail. It doesn't have the neon cable cars or megaphone-led tour groups that fill the paths of more commercialized mountains. This is a deliberate choice by local authorities, who have worked to protect the fragile ecosystems and prevent overdevelopment. The balance they've struck is delicate and rare in China, a sanctuary preserved more for its ecological and spiritual value than for ticket revenue. Visitors are encouraged to tread lightly, to listen rather than speak, to walk rather than climb. Perhaps the most unforgettable experience Mount Daiming offers comes at sunrise, from one of its upper ridgelines. Standing above the clouds, wrapped in a blanket of vapor, the sky slowly turns violet and then molten gold. Below, the sea of karst peaks rises and falls like a petrified wave, their silhouettes half lost in mist. You feel as if you're witnessing the breath of the earth itself. It is at once humbling and transcendent. In that moment, Daimingshan doesn't just seem unreal, it feels sacred, like a forgotten place between heaven and the world we know. Hidden in the depths of Guizhou, among the mist-wrapped highlands and silent, ancient forests, lies Mount Miaoling, known in Chinese as Miaolingshan, a place that hums quietly with memory, tradition, and the deep resonance of the earth. This is not a sharp, jagged range that pierces the heavens, but rather a rolling, undulating highland that rises and falls like the breath of the land itself. Its presence is not theatrical, but spiritual, and its power lies in the vastness of its greenery, the secrecy of its fog, and the enduring cultures that have called it home for centuries. It is a mountain of murmurs rather than thunder, a mountain that holds its magic within. Stretching through the heart of central Guizhou province, Miaolingshan is part of the Yunnan-Guizhou Plateau, a landscape shaped by geological uplift and covered in deeply weathered rock. But unlike many mountain systems in China defined by vertical grandeur, Miaoling is an old soul, its ridges softened by time, its valleys cradled in deep folds, and its peaks modest in height but grand in presence. The entire region is often veiled in a perpetual fog, especially in the early mornings and evenings, as warm, moisture-laden air from southern China meets the cooler elevations of the plateau. This persistent mist lends the mountain an air of secrecy, wrapping villages and forests in shifting silver veils that blur reality and legend. Ecologically, Mount Miaoling is a treasure chest of biodiversity. Its climate, a mix of humid subtropical and highland temperate, combined with its complex topography, has created a cradle for plant and animal life. Forests stretch across the slopes in seemingly endless waves, dominated by broadleaf evergreens, ancient chestnut trees, bamboo groves, and wild rhododendrons that burst into color in the spring. This forest is also home to a network of medicinal herbs used for centuries by local healers, roots and leaves with names older than written history, drawn from memory, passed down through generations. The animal life is equally rich. Birds call through the mist, crested serpent eagles, laughing thrushes, and the brilliant Chinese paradise flycatcher with its long, ribbon-like tail. Small mammals like civets and muntjac deer rustle in the underbrush, and insects hum in layers across the forest floor. Many species found in the Miaoling Range are endemic to the region, survivors of a prehistoric world that was never entirely erased. The mountain feels like a refuge not just for the body, but for evolution itself. But Mount Miaoling is not merely a reservoir of nature, it is a living museum of China's ethnic mosaic. Its slopes and valleys are dotted with villages inhabited by the Miao, Bui, Dong, and Shui peoples, ethnic minorities whose roots in these lands run deeper than most written Chinese history. These communities live in harmony with the mountain, their wooden stilt houses perched on terraced hillsides, their fields of rice, maize, and rapeseed glowing golden under the highland sun. The Miao people, in particular, have shaped much of the mountain's cultural identity. In their language and songs, Miaoling carries the connotation of ancestral mountain, a place not only of origin but of spirit. Festivals are tied to the rhythms of the land: spring planting rituals, autumn harvest dances, and the famous Sisters' Meal Festival, where young women wear ornate silver headdresses and exchange symbolic gifts of colored rice. In these villages, drum towers rise above the rooftops, and wooden bridges curve across rivers like elements in a painting. There is music here, flutes carved from bamboo, songs that ripple like water across the fields, and every song carries a story of love, of history, or of nature itself. Traveling through Mount Miaoling is less about reaching a summit and more about moving through layers of a breathing landscape. Paths wind through thickets of bamboo, past stone wells and carved totems, through patches of ancient tea trees and waterfalls that seem to emerge from the fog with no beginning or end. There are no great temples perched on precipices, no towering pagodas. Instead, the mountain's spirituality is quiet, intimate. Small shrines are tucked into tree hollows. Incense curls upward from niches in the rock. Local beliefs are animistic, shaped by centuries of coexistence with the land. Trees are seen as elders. Rivers are considered daughters of the rain. Certain stones are believed to carry memory, and even now, elders whisper that the mountain can speak to those who listen closely enough. Miaoling is also known for its ghost mists, a local phenomenon where sudden veils of fog roll in so thick and fast that they seem almost sentient. Entire valleys vanish in seconds. A bright sunny day can be erased in a breath. In folklore, these mists are said to be the breath of the mountain itself, or the spirits of ancestors returning to visit their descendants. Hikers who get caught in them often report disorientation, not just physical, but temporal, as if they've stepped backward through centuries. There are places on the mountain where GPS fails, where the forest seems to shift subtly, and where silence settles so fully that even the snapping of a twig feels profound. Geologically, Miaolingshan holds ancient secrets. Its rock formations include some of the oldest sedimentary layers in southern China, containing fossils and mineral veins that speak to a time when the sea once covered this entire region. In some valleys, old stone paths carved by salt traders and foot caravans are still visible, worn smooth by centuries of travel. These trade routes once connected remote highland villages with the outside world, weaving the mountain into broader networks of culture and commerce without ever disrupting its core identity. In recent years, as China's domestic tourism has begun to stretch beyond the iconic and the commercialized, Mount Miaoling has quietly emerged as a sanctuary for seekers of authenticity. Eco-lodges and cultural homestays have been developed in a few of the villages, often run by local families who preserve the old ways even as they welcome visitors with genuine warmth. Yet, much of the mountain remains as it always was, silent, hidden, real. The sound of a stream, the echo of a flute from across a misty ravine, the rustle of bamboo in the twilight. It is here that time folds, not in straight lines, but in circles. Mount Miaoling does not reveal itself quickly. It asks for patience, for humility. It is not a mountain that dazzles, but one that seeps into the spirit, slow and sure as rainfall. And once you have walked through its mists, shared rice wine under a thatched roof, or stood in the silence of a morning fog so thick it swallows even sound, you begin to understand, this is not just a mountain range. It is a living poem, an old one, written not with ink, but with stone, water, and memory. Rising like a dream from the blue embrace of the East China Sea, Mount Luojia Island Mountain, is one of China's most mystical and spiritually saturated landscapes. Located off the coast of Putuo district in Jiushan Archipelago, Zhejiang Province, this sacred island mountain is more than just a geographical formation. It is a portal, a sanctuary, and, in the hearts of millions of Buddhists, a place where the boundary between the human world and the divine grows thin. Bathed in the soft light of ocean sunrises and the constant rhythm of waves, Luojia shimmers with a presence that feels ancient and otherworldly, as though it were less a place and more an echo of something eternal. Luojia Island is a part of the sacred Putuo mountain area, which itself is one of the 4 sacred mountains of Chinese Buddhism, specifically dedicated to Guanyin, the Bodhisattva of compassion. But while Putuo Mountain is visited by thousands of pilgrims and tourists each year, Luojia Island remains far more secluded, more intimate, and cloaked in a mystery that only heightens its sanctity. Just a few kilometers offshore from Putuo's main temples, Luojia can only be reached by boat, and its remote location has protected its spiritual and ecological integrity in a way few other sacred mountains in China have enjoyed. Legend says that Luojia was once the exact place where Guanyin attained enlightenment, or perhaps even where she descended to hear the cries of the world. In Buddhist cosmology, Luojia is sometimes considered an earthly manifestation of Potalaca, the legendary Pure Land where Guanyin resides, surrounded by oceans and floating on clouds. The name Luojia is thought to be a transliteration of Raga, the ancient Indian city, but here, it has become infused with Chinese mythology and Buddhist devotion. Monks refer to it as the Invisible Island, not because it cannot be seen, but because it hides its true essence from those who are not ready to receive it. Stepping onto the island, one is struck immediately by the overwhelming presence of both nature and divinity. The terrain rises abruptly from the sea, with steep granite cliffs that glisten with salt and spray. Narrow, winding paths lead up the forested slopes, past gnarled pine trees bent by ocean wind, through thick groves of camellia and wild chrysanthemum. The scent of incense is carried on the breeze, even when no one is burning any, such is the pervasive aura of worship that blankets this place. The call of seabirds, the hush of wind through the trees, and the constant lull of waves form a natural symphony that blurs the boundary between meditation and existence. Despite its relatively small size, Mount Luojia contains several key sacred sites that have become objects of deep reverence. The most important of these is the Chaoying Cave, or Tide Sound Cave, a hollow chamber carved into the island's rocky southern face, where the tides echo like the chants of monks. Pilgrims often sit at the cave's entrance for hours, listening to the ocean's voice reverberate within, believing it to be the whispered teachings of Guanyin herself. It is not unusual for visitors to break into tears here, not from sadness, but from a profound sense of connection, as though the sea is speaking directly to their hearts. Further inland, up steep steps lined with centuries-old stone lanterns, lies the Bodhisattva platform, a high clearing where a simple, weathered statue of Guanyin stands overlooking the ocean. There are no grand gates, no gilded pavilions, just wind, sky, and stone. At dawn, the sun rises directly behind the statue, casting her in a golden halo and painting the surrounding sea in hues of flame and pearl. Those who arrive early enough often perform silent prostrations here, their forms silhouetted against the horizon, as sea and sky seem to merge into one infinite canvas of light. The flora of Luojia Mountain is subtle yet lush. Because of its oceanic climate and relative seclusion, the island has developed a micro-ecosystem where rare species of coastal vegetation flourish. Tea plants grow wild on the terrace slopes, descendants of seeds planted by monks centuries ago. In spring, the island bursts into bloom with bright pink azaleas and wild orchids, while in autumn, golden grasses wave like ocean currents across the high plateaus. The sound of bees and cicadas mingles with the sea breeze, and the entire island seems to pulse with life, an island not just alive, but awake. Historically, Luojia has served as a retreat for monks seeking isolation and enlightenment. Several small hermitages still exist on the island, simple stone huts with no electricity or running water, tucked into forest clearings or carved into cliff faces. These are not tourist attractions, but functioning places of meditation and retreat, where ascetics go to spend weeks or months in silence, living off rice and rainwater, tending small gardens, and praying in solitude. Their presence is rarely visible. Sometimes, you might spot a thread of smoke from a distant chimney or hear a faint gong at sunset, but otherwise, they remain part of the island's living soul, invisible to the hurried eye. Modern visitors to Luojia are required to take a small ferry from Putuo Island, and even this short journey across the waves feels transformative. As the boat leaves behind the noise of temples and tourist stalls, and the silhouette of Luojia rises ahead like a sleeping deity, something within begins to shift. It's not just about arriving at a sacred place, it's about crossing a threshold, leaving behind the noise of modern life and entering a space where silence speaks louder than words. The ferry dock is modest, just a small landing cove where ocean-crusted steps lead up into the forest. But for many, it feels like the entrance to a world that exists just slightly outside of time. Unlike more commercial Buddhist destinations in China, Luojia has resisted overdevelopment. There are no souvenir shops, no fast food vendors, no hotels. Visitors often bring simple offerings, flowers, fruits, a book of sutras, and return to Putuo by dusk, changed in small, quiet ways. The local authorities, in collaboration with religious organizations, have worked to ensure that the island remains a place of genuine sanctity, not spectacle. There's something elemental about Luojia that defies even the best efforts of description. It is not the tallest, grandest, or most architecturally stunning mountain in China, but it is perhaps one of the most spiritually profound. Here, stone and sea, forest and fog, shrine and silence come together to form not just a landscape, but a state of being. Whether you come as a pilgrim, a traveler, or simply a seeker of beauty, Luojia doesn't demand anything of you. It simply invites you to be still, to listen, to the waves, to the wind, and maybe, if you're quiet enough, to your own soul. Mount Sanqing, or Sanqingshan, situated in the northeast of Jiangxi province, is not merely a mountain in the geological sense. It is a sculpted dream of the divine, carved in granite and cloaked in mist. Revered as one of the most sacred mountains in Taoism and named after the three pure ones, Sanqing, the highest deities in the Taoist pantheon, this majestic formation feels less like a place and more like an illusion materialized in stone. Its landscape is a phantasmagoria of towering spires, sheer cliffs, impossibly balanced rocks, and swirling clouds that drift and twist through its forested crevices like celestial serpents. Unlike the soft, rolling elegance of ranges like Miaolingshan or the oceanic sanctity of Luojia, Mount Sanqing is raw, vertical, and surreal. Here, nature has fashioned an otherworldly sculpture garden of sharp granite peaks, over 1,500 in total, many of which resemble beings, animals, and symbols so precise that it seems impossible they were not shaped by conscious hands. Some formations rise like giant fingers pointing to the heavens, others like dragons frozen mid-flight, while some resemble seated immortals lost in meditation. These formations have names like the python turning its head, Taoist robe hanging on a cliff, or the immortal playing a flute, reflecting the deep integration of Taoist mythology into the mountain's visual identity. The highest of the mountain's three principal peaks, Yujing Peak, soars to 1,817 meters, nearly 6,000 feet, while the other two, Yuxie and Yuhua, complete the sacred trinity. Together, these three summits are believed to embody the essence of the three pure ones, who represent the Tao's boundless, formless origins. To stand among these peaks is to feel the presence of cosmic balance, yang and yin, form and formlessness, movement and stillness. Everything here, from the cracked stone paths to the way clouds linger around cliff edges, seems imbued with deliberate harmony. The air in Sanqing is a living element. On most days, clouds pour through the valleys and folds of the granite terrain with slow grace, sometimes creeping along ridgelines, sometimes plunging like waterfalls into unseen chasms. This phenomenon, known locally as Yunhai or Sea of Clouds, creates the sensation of standing on islands in the sky. Whole forests disappear and re-emerge in veils of vapor. Pillars that were solid a moment ago vanish completely into the white, only to suddenly reappear closer, transformed by perspective and illusion. It's as if the mountain is constantly shifting its form, inviting contemplation, doubt, and spiritual surrender. For Taoists and spiritual seekers, Mount Sanqing has long been a site of profound importance. Small Taoist temples, meditation huts, and sacred shrines are tucked into cliffs and hollows throughout the mountain. These are not always grand in scale, but they pulse with quiet power. The Sanqing Palace, perched among pine trees and often wrapped in mist, is one of the most significant spiritual centers here. Inside, the three pure ones are depicted in colorful iconography, surrounded by incense, offerings of fruit, and handwritten prayers pinned delicately to altars. The silence inside is almost absolute, broken only by the soft footfalls of pilgrims and the rustling of wind through paper charms. Historically, Taoist hermits and practitioners retreated to Sanqing's caves and forests for decades-long isolation. These sages believed the mountain's geomantic energy, its qi, was especially potent, ideal for attaining spiritual immortality or xian. There are still hidden grottos named after such figures: Immortal's Bed, Cliff of Feathered Ascension, Cave of Eternal Stillness. Local stories abound of those who came seeking wisdom and never returned, either swallowed by the fog or transfigured into beings of pure energy, having transcended the mortal shell. Ecologically, Sanqingshan is a sanctuary of extraordinary biological richness. Its mixture of granite-based terrain, subtropical climate, and elevation gradients supports a vast range of flora and fauna. Over 2,500 species of plants flourish here, from lowland bamboo and camellia to rare alpine ferns and ancient ginkgos clinging to cliffsides. In spring, azaleas explode across the slopes, their color softened by the ever-present mist. Pine trees grow in dramatic poses, some rooted directly into vertical stone, bending horizontally over dizzying voids, their branches sculpted by centuries of wind and fog. These twisted pines are often likened to wise sages in meditation, perfectly capturing the mountain's spiritual aesthetic. Animal life thrives as well. Macaques dart across stone paths, while the air is filled with the calls of red-billed lyothrixes, laughing thrushes, and, if one is lucky and patient, the flutter of the rare and elusive Cabot's tragopan. Small mammals like serows and badgers creep through the undergrowth, and insect life abounds in the forested lower slopes, contributing to the quiet chorus that fills the air when the clouds lift and the sun dapples the moss-covered forest floor. Sanqing is also home to one of the most breathtaking suspended walkways in China, a narrow, curving path built into the side of sheer cliffs, with nothing but air and clouds beneath your feet. From here, one can observe the dramatic drop-offs and towering granite formations at eye level, as if walking alongside the mountain's dreaming thoughts. In foggy weather, the experience becomes transcendental. You are walking through the sky, unattached to ground or logic. In clear weather, the vistas stretch for miles, an ocean of forested peaks, winding rivers, and distant valleys far below. Unlike more commercialized sacred mountains, Sanqingshan has retained much of its tranquility and unspoiled essence. Its status as a UNESCO World Heritage Site has helped preserve both its ecological integrity and its spiritual legacy. Development has been limited and carefully regulated. Visitor paths are often built of wood or stone, with an emphasis on blending into the natural landscape. There are few modern distractions here, no noisy cable cars dominating every view, no blaring souvenir markets overwhelming the senses. This is a mountain that asks visitors to walk slowly, to breathe deeply, to listen not just with ears but with the heart. There's a moment on Sanqing, usually during the late afternoon, when the mist begins to lift and golden sunlight pours across the granite like a slow blessing. The clouds part just enough to reveal a towering spire in the distance, haloed by a sunbow, one of those circular rainbows formed by sunlight refracting in high-altitude droplets. It's a phenomenon that feels more like revelation than weather. And it's in this moment that many visitors feel the mountain's deepest truth, not as a place to conquer or consume, but as a space to dissolve, to become part of something immeasurably vast, ancient, and alive. In the Taoist worldview, the path is not upward but inward, not the summit, but the journey. And in Sanqing, every stone, every pine, every drifting veil of mist is a step along that inward journey. The mountain does not shout its holiness, it whispers it, patiently, through rock and wind and cloud. In the remote hills of western Fujian, where emerald forests embrace winding rivers and time itself seems to have slowed, rises the otherworldly splendor of Mount Taining Danxia, a place of deep, layered beauty and geological strangeness. Far from China's popular mountain circuits and urban shadows, Taining is a land of surreal red rock formations, hidden valleys, and cave dwellings so old they seem hewn by forgotten gods. Here, the earth is painted in tones of ochre and rust, shaped into cliffs, gorges, and narrow passageways by millennia of wind and rain, forming one of China's most remarkable Danxia landscapes. Danxia refers to a particular kind of landform, characterized by steep red sandstone cliffs and unique erosional patterns, that appears only in China and a few scattered places across the globe. Mount Taining boasts one of the most visually dramatic and ecologically intact examples of this geomorphology. Unlike the needle-like granite of Mount Sanqing or the rolling fog-draped ridges of Miaoling, the Taining Danxia is horizontal, striated, and warm-toned. It is a mountain range carved not by upward thrust but by slow surrender, layers of sedimentary rock laid down, hardened, cracked, and then etched into alien sculptures by water and time. The heart of the region lies within the Taining Global Geopark, a UNESCO-recognized site encompassing more than 500 square kilometers of protected terrain. The scenery here unfolds in waves of vermilion and orange, broken by deep green ravines and ribbons of glimmering rivers. Towering red cliffs stand like sleeping giants over densely wooded basins. Narrow slot canyons open into sudden sunlit amphitheaters where birds sing among hanging vines and bamboo thickets. Some cliffs resemble massive tablets inscribed with the patterns of erosion, while others curve and twist like the sinews of a god turned to stone. Among the most iconic features of Taining is the Zijin Rock Scenic Area, often called the Red Walls of China for its vast, vertical sandstone faces that rise abruptly from the jungle floor. Here, gravity-defying cliffs stand hundreds of meters tall, sheer, and unbroken, forming natural fortresses once used as strongholds during times of war and rebellion. Hidden among these cliffs are countless cave dwellings, some natural, others carved by human hands, dating back over 1,000 years. These shelters, often situated high above the forest floor, were once used by monks, hermits, and even entire communities seeking refuge from political turmoil and banditry. Narrow stone stairways, now covered in moss and half lost to time, still lead up to these caves, where soot-darkened ceilings and faded wall carvings whisper of forgotten lives lived in silence. One of the most spiritually and historically important sites is Xuefeng Temple, a hidden Buddhist sanctuary nestled against a red cliff and accessible only by a long ascent through forested trails and rock passages. Built during the Song dynasty, this temple blends almost invisibly into the rock, with its wooden eaves and stone platforms pressed against the cliff face like a natural extension of the mountain itself. Inside, incense burns in heavy coils, and light filters through narrow windows cut directly into the stone. Monks still reside here, tending to the temple and the surrounding forest, keeping alive a rhythm of daily ritual that has persisted for centuries. Mount Taining is not only a place of stone and silence, but of water and song. The Jinhu Lake, or Golden Lake, lies nestled within the heart of the range, its waters winding between steep Danxia ridges and forested slopes. Formed by the damming of a river in the 20th century, the lake now reflects the crimson cliffs like a mirror held to the past. Small boats drift along its placid surface, offering visitors a rare, immersive perspective of the towering formations above. Caves open directly onto the lake, some containing ancient Buddhist carvings and others still unexplored, rumored to extend deep into the mountain's body. When mist rises from the lake at dawn, it wraps the entire basin in a dreamlike stillness, water, stone, and sky folding into one fluid image. Ecologically, Mount Taining is a biodiversity hotspot. The red rock formations may seem barren from afar, but they cradle entire microclimates within their folds. Subtropical forests of camphor, sweet osmanthus, and evergreen oaks cling to cliff faces and grow thick in shaded valleys. Bamboo groves rustle in the wind, their roots weaving into the soft Danxia soil. The region is home to rare and endangered species, including the Chinese giant salamander and the clouded leopard, both of which haunt the quieter corners of the park. Bird life flourishes here. Kingfishers dart over streams, eagles soar above ridgelines, and swallows nest in cliffside crevices above water-worn caves. The human culture of the Taining region is rich and rooted, shaped by centuries of life. Entwined with the land, ancient villages such as Shangqing and Changjiao lie at the edges of the forest, their homes built from the same red sandstone as the cliffs themselves. These are communities where wood carving, ink brush painting, and herbal medicine remain living traditions. Locals believe the mountains are alive, not metaphorically, but spiritually. They speak of mountain spirits, of guardian deities who watch over caves and springs, and of sacred rocks that answer prayers when touched with sincerity. During traditional festivals, villagers hike up to ancient altars to offer food, light incense, and chant beneath the stars, maintaining ties that stretch across centuries. Tourism in Mount Taining has grown in recent decades, but the area remains relatively untouched compared to China's more commercialized scenic zones. Infrastructure has been developed with care and restraint. Wooden walkways, stone paths, and eco-friendly viewing platforms allow access without defacing the terrain. Local guides are often from the area itself, weaving folklore and lived knowledge into every step of the journey. While a growing number of visitors come to marvel at the Danxia cliffs and tranquil lake, a large portion are domestic pilgrims and nature enthusiasts, drawn not by spectacle, but by something quieter and more enduring. Perhaps the greatest magic of Mount Taining lies in the light. At sunrise and sunset, the red sandstone glows as though lit from within. Shadows stretch across the cliffs, etching detail into every groove and cleft. Mist rolls in from the forest floor, winding upward like incense smoke toward the peaks. In those moments, the mountain does not feel entirely of this world. It feels like a place suspended between myth and memory, between fire and water, between the breath of the earth and the beating heart of time. To visit Taining is to walk through stories written not in ink, but in rock and silence. It is to touch the ancient bones of the planet and find in them the reflections of human longing. For safety, for meaning, for wonder. And in the hush of its cave temples, the hush of its wind among bamboo, that longing finds an answer, not in words, but in the profound stillness of a mountain that has watched 1,000 generations pass and still remains, red and radiant, listening. Tucked within the lush southern heart of Guangdong province, Mount Lianhua, meaning Lotus Flower Mountain, blooms not in petals, but in stone. Rising from the humid embrace of the subtropical plains near Guangzhou and Foshan, Lianhuashan is a mountain shaped like a lotus in mid-bloom, with ridges unfurling outward from a central core, much like the sacred flower from which it takes its name. But this is not merely a geographical resemblance, it is a spiritual and symbolic echo as well. In Buddhism, the lotus represents purity, rebirth, and the ability to rise above the murk of life into the clarity of enlightenment. It's no coincidence that Lianhuashan has been revered for centuries as a place of meditation, pilgrimage, and quiet revelation. Unlike the dramatic verticality of China's more famous granite peaks or the scarred red cliffs of Danxia formations, Mount Lianhua is gentle, rounded, and covered in green, dense, damp, living green. From base to summit, the mountain is swathed in thick subtropical forest, where every branch seems to carry moisture, and the air itself feels rich with the breath of the earth. Towering banyan trees twist their roots over boulders and into stone stairways, and monkey vines drape from the canopy, creating a curtain of living threads that filters the sunlight into golden mist. Ferns the size of people grow in the underbrush, and songbirds flit from perch to perch, vanishing as quickly as they appear. The mountain is relatively modest in elevation compared to the snow-covered giants of the Tibetan plateau, but it makes up for it with an intimacy that's almost surreal. Its rounded hills fold gently into each other, forming secluded valleys where fog pools and the air is thick with the perfume of flowering trees. The most striking feature of Lianhuashan, however, is the distinctive lotus-like formation seen from above, a core summit ringed by petal-shaped outcroppings, natural terraces, and rounded ridges that appear to unfurl in geometric balance. It's a shape made not by human design, but by ancient tectonics and weathering, giving the mountain both a sacred geometry and a natural serenity. Within this natural temple, spiritual traditions have flourished for over 1,000 years. Scattered throughout the mountain are small temples, pavilions, and hermitages, some still active, others reclaimed by moss and tree roots. The most famous among them is the Lianhua Temple, perched near the mountain's midpoint and long associated with both Chan, Zen, Buddhism and Daoist meditation practices. The temple complex, though modest in size, sits in perfect harmony with its surroundings. Weathered grey stone blending into the mountain, tile roofs peeking through banyan branches, and incense smoke drifting through bamboo groves. Statues of Guanyin, the Bodhisattva of compassion, stand watch over quiet courtyards, and pilgrims from across Guangdong climb the winding paths to offer prayers and light candles at her feet. What makes Mount Lianhua truly unreal is its duality. It is simultaneously ancient and alive, spiritual and sensory, sacred and wild. You might begin your ascent along stone steps lined with crimson camellia bushes, their petals scattered like offerings. A few minutes later, a narrow trail might branch off into a deeper, quieter wood where the call of a cuckoo echoes in the foliage and a misted stream gurgles unseen below. Wild orchids cling to rocky faces, nourished by air so humid you can taste it, while above you, eagles ride the thermals in slow circles over the tree canopy. From certain ridges, clearings open up to panoramic views of the Pearl River Delta below, a sprawling plain of waterways, rice paddies, and cities stretching all the way to the South China Sea. The contrast between the natural quietude of Lianhuashan and the modern world below is jarring. One moment you're surrounded by thick bamboo forests and the rhythmic clack of cicadas, the next you're staring out at a metropolis of millions, Guangzhou's skyline shimmering in the heat haze, only a short distance away, yet worlds apart in spirit. This proximity to major cities has made Mount Lianhua a popular local escape, especially among artists, poets, and those seeking temporary reprieve from the relentless rhythm of urban life. During the Tang and Song dynasties, it was a favored retreat for scholar officials and monks who composed poetry under the shadow of the banyans or meditated beside lotus-filled ponds. Carvings from those eras still remain, cryptic poems etched into cliff faces, stone tablets half swallowed by vines, and ancient calligraphy that seems to breathe when mist settles upon it. Despite its accessibility and popularity, a remarkable quiet persists across much of Lianhuashan. Paths diverge frequently, allowing solitude even on busy days. Many of these trails lead to hidden grottos or natural rock formations revered for their supposed spiritual energy. The Lotus Heart Cave, for example, is a natural cavity shaped like the seed pod of a lotus flower, deep within the mountain's southern face. Said to amplify meditative focus, it draws both monks and New Age seekers who come to sit in silence within its mineral heart. In the early morning, the entire mountain is often cloaked in mist, a phenomenon that locals consider the mountain's breath, its living exhale into the dawn. As the sun rises, the fog begins to retreat, revealing layer upon layer of green ridges and golden temple roofs. Water trickles down hidden brooks, pooling in jade-colored basins or falling in miniature cascades that echo like bells. Butterflies swarm in pockets of sunlight, and the entire landscape seems to pulse with a gentle, waking rhythm. Ecologically, Mount Lianhua is part of the South China subtropical evergreen broadleaf forest zone, one of the richest biomes in East Asia. It shelters a mosaic of flora, from fig trees and orchids to medicinal herbs long prized in traditional Chinese medicine. The fauna is equally vibrant, including monkeys, pangolins, civet cats, and a broad spectrum of bird species that thrive in the multi-layered forest. Conservation efforts are ongoing to protect both the biodiversity and cultural heritage of the region, as increasing development threatens to encroach upon its quiet sanctity. And yet, despite modern pressures, the soul of Mount Lianhua endures. It lives in the slow turn of lotus leaves in temple ponds, in the hush of forest paths worn smooth by centuries of feet, in the calligraphy brushed on stone by hands long gone. It survives in the mind of every pilgrim who climbs in silence, in every visitor who lingers too long at the summit gazing into a mist-filled valley, feeling not just wonder, but reverence. To walk through Lianhuashan is to experience a mountain that teaches without speaking. It does not dazzle with grandeur or overwhelm with vertical cliffs. Instead, it opens slowly, like its namesake bloom, inviting you inward, into shade, into stillness, into the oldest parts of yourself. It is unreal not because it is strange, but because it is so intimately beautiful, so harmoniously alive, that for a moment you forget the rest of the world exists at all. Encircling the storied highland town of Songpan in northern Sichuan, Mount Songpan. More accurately, the mountainous complex that enfolds this ancient settlement like a protective cradle, is a place where geography and history fuse into something utterly unreal. Here, in the misty threshold between the Han heartland and the Tibetan plateau, jagged alpine peaks rise above sweeping valleys carved by glacial runoff, and the scent of juniper mingles with the distant flutter of prayer flags. Songpanshan is not a single mountain, but rather a sweeping range of high-altitude ridges, knife-like spines, pine-draped hills, and secretive meadows that converge around one of China's most remarkable frontier towns. Located at the confluence of three significant ethnic regions, Han Chinese, Hui Muslims, and Tibetans, Songpan has long served as a crossroads of commerce and culture, and its surrounding mountains reflect this composite identity. The town itself sits at about 2,800 meters above sea level, but the mountains that surround it rise dramatically higher, with some peaks reaching well beyond 4,000 meters, brushing the realm of snow and sky. The effect is mesmerizing. On clear days, the ridges of Songpanshan glow a fierce cobalt blue in the morning light, their pine forests etched in silhouette against the icy crowns above. As you begin to ascend the trails that spiral out from Songpan's northern and western limits, the transformation is immediate. The air thins and sharpens. The scent of burning yak dung and pine resin wafts from distant smoke chimneys. Larches, spruce, and wild rhododendrons form a textured green cloak along the lower slopes, giving way, at higher elevations, to flower-dotted alpine meadows and barren, lichen-covered scree fields. The soundscape changes, too. In the town, you hear market chatter, the clop of mule hooves, and the soft lilt of Tibetan prayer chants. On the slopes, it's wind, birdsong, the echo of a distant waterfall, and, sometimes, nothing at all. One of the most enchanting aspects of Mount Songpan is its seasonal transformation. In spring and summer, wildflowers take over the highland meadows, erupting in vibrant riots of blue poppies, edelweiss, and alpine azaleas. Yak herders set up seasonal encampments, and the air hums with bees and birds. Autumn brings a cascade of gold and fire red across the coniferous slopes, mirrored by the icy clarity of highland lakes like the hidden gem of Dazhar Lake, its still waters reflecting a perfect, upside-down mountain world. Winter, meanwhile, descends with soft ferocity. Snow piles high on the ridges, wolves and foxes roam the margins, and the few travelers who venture into the higher paths find a world blanketed in white silence, pierced only by the occasional flicker of a fire in a herder's hut. The cultural life of these mountains is just as vivid. Tibetan influence here is deep and pervasive, woven into the very fabric of the landscape. You'll find prayer flags strung across passes and sacred cairns known as ovu marking high points where travelers stop to offer thanks to the mountain spirits. Small stupas dot the ridgelines, some gleaming gold in the sunlight, others faded and cracked with age. It's not uncommon to come across hermit huts, still inhabited by wandering lamas or solitary pilgrims who have withdrawn into these heights in search of clarity and spiritual ascension. One of the most spiritually potent spots in Songpanchen is the sacred Jiagar waterfall, often called the White Dragon Vale. Here, glacial meltwater plunges from a limestone cliff in thin, sheer ribbons that sparkle like silk in the alpine sunlight. According to local Tibetan lore, the waterfall is the earthly manifestation of a sky dragon's breath, and pilgrims often leave offerings of yak butter, prayer scarves, or small coins at the base of the cascade. The scene is both humbling and ethereal, a place where nature and faith intertwine with seamless grace. The mountain paths themselves offer more than just scenic vistas. They are ancient arteries of trade, pilgrimage, and legend. Centuries ago, the tea-horse road, Chamagudao, wound through these mountains, linking the fertile tea-producing regions of Yunnan and Sichuan with the Tibetan plateau. Caravans of mules and yaks laden with bricks of dark pure tea once clambered along these treacherous ridges in exchange for salt, wool, and war horses. Remnants of this bygone era linger in the form of stone-paved caravan tracks, ruined inns, and aged suspension bridges that span roaring mountain streams. In the folds of Songpanchen also lies a remarkable ethno-cultural diversity. Tibetan villages with whitewashed walls and flat roofs cling to cliff edges and nestle in sheltered hollows Hui Muslim hamlets, identifiable by their crescent-topped mosques, occupy river valleys where cornfields and apple orchards thrive in the rich loam. Han farming communities, by contrast, typically populate the lower altitudes, where rice paddies and terraces climb the hillsides in geometrical harmony. The proximity of these cultures has birthed a shared mountain identity, one that respects nature, honors tradition, and lives in cadence with the seasons. A trek through Songpanchen might begin in the ancient walled town of Songpan itself, where the Qing-era city gates still stand watch over cobbled streets and bustling market stalls. You might hear Tibetan women hawking turquoise jewelry beside Hui butchers slicing yak meat, while Han tea vendors pour steaming cups of green leaf infusion. From there, trails lead out into the surrounding ridges, into a world of stillness, thunderous waterfalls, remote monasteries, and eagle-haunted skies. One unforgettable route leads to the remote village of Huanglongxi, hidden in a basin between the peaks. The path climbs through pine forests, past grazing yaks, and shimmering lakes, until it opens onto the surreal travertine terraces of Huanglong itself, golden pools of crystalline water cascading down a mountainside in a pattern that looks too perfect to be natural. These terraces, formed over millennia by mineral-rich springs, are considered sacred by local Tibetans and often compared to a heavenly dragon's scales frozen in stone. But even outside these famed destinations, Songpanchen offers 1,000 quiet miracles. A grove of frost-tipped spruce at dawn, a cave shrine where a single butter lamp flickers in the dark, a crumbling monastery wall where faded murals of sky-walking bodhisattvas still smile through the centuries, a sudden break in the clouds revealing a snow-covered summit, its crags glowing orange in the last light of day. In the end, what makes Mount Songpan unreal is not just its visual splendor or even its spiritual gravity. It's the sheer convergence of contrasts, between alpine wilderness and cultural warmth, between solitude and the echo of ancient caravans, between sky and stone, faith and forest, silence and story. These mountains do not simply exist, they whisper, witness, and welcome. To travel through Songpanchen is to walk through a highland realm where the edges of history, nature, and mysticism blur until you are no longer sure where the trail ends and where the myth begins. Mount Yunwu, literally Cloud and Mist Mountain, stands as a quiet sentinel on the western edges of China's Ningxia Hui Autonomous Region, brushing shoulders with the Gobi Desert and yet offering a landscape that is utterly unexpected in such a parched province. Rising from the dusty plateau and stretching toward the yawning blue of the sky, Yunwushan is not just a geographical feature, but a place of transition. It marks the meeting point between desert and forest, arid wind and mountain mist, barrenness and biological refuge. To approach Mount Yunwu is to pass through vast stretches of sun-baked land, dry riverbeds, sparse scrubland, and windswept dunes of ochre and grey. But gradually, almost imperceptibly, the terrain begins to change. Low hills swell into forested ridges, the palette shifts from rust to green, and the air thickens with the subtle dampness of higher elevation. The mountain rises like a promise from the flatlands, a bastion of life where it seems no such thing should exist. This unusual environmental contrast is precisely what makes Yunwushen so unreal. Though not towering by alpine standards, its main peak reaches just over 2,300 meters. The mountain's relative isolation and ecological significance make it feel monumental. The name Cloud and Mist becomes immediately clear as one climbs its slopes. Even in the dry months, wisps of fog often cling to the treetops in the early morning, wrapping the ridges in a silver shawl that melts away only with the rise of the sun. This vapor is not just poetic, it is essential. The mountain's forests act like sponges, capturing moisture from the atmosphere and helping sustain a mini ecosystem unlike anything else for miles around. The plant life on Yunwushen is lush compared to the surrounding terrain. Towering pines and spruce dominate the upper reaches, while deciduous trees such as birch, elm, and Chinese ash cloak the lower slopes in a vibrant seasonal tapestry. In spring and summer, the forest floor is carpeted with wildflowers, pale blue gentians, bright yellow anemones, and delicate pink peonies, which contrast dramatically with the bone-dry steppes below. In autumn, the mountain becomes a burnished mosaic of crimson, gold, and rust, a startling explosion of color against the still dusty plains. Animal life, too, finds refuge in these shaded highlands. Roe deer, foxes, and badgers patrol the lower forests, while hawks and eagles soar over the open ridges. In the quieter valleys, one might even catch a glimpse of the rare Chinese forest musk deer, whose tiny, fanged form is both elusive and endangered. High-altitude meadows hum with the life of bees, cicadas, and butterflies, while still ponds and trickling streams offer watering holes for creatures great and small. For centuries, Yunwushen has been a sanctuary not only for flora and fauna but for the human spirit. It is one of the oldest sacred mountains in northwestern China, long revered by Taoist practitioners who believed that its mist-veiled peaks offered a connection to the immortal realms. Ancient stone steps still snake up the mountain's face, leading to half-forgotten temples hidden in groves of pine and flowering plum. The most well-known is the Zhenwu Temple, a quiet structure nestled halfway up the mountain, named for the Taoist deity often associated with control over water and weather, fitting, perhaps, for a mountain that coaxes moisture from desert winds. The temple is modest in structure but profound in atmosphere. Weathered stone lanterns line the approach, moss grows thick over the tiled roofs, and incense coils smolder in the shadows of old pine beams. From its terrace, one can gaze out over a wide vista of Ningxia's rolling basin, where the yellow earth stretches to the horizon in waves, punctuated by winding rivers and sunlit villages. In the mornings, this view is often lost in a sea of cloud that glides up from the lowlands and swirls through the trees, transforming the entire mountaintop into a realm of white silence. It's no wonder that monks once sought enlightenment here. In more recent decades, Yunwushen has also become a locus for scientific interest and conservation. As an ecological anomaly, a green island surrounded by a sea of arid land, it hosts a surprising range of biodiversity, some of it found nowhere else in the region. Researchers come here to study microclimates, high-altitude plant adaptation, and how forests can thrive at the margins of desertification. It is also a vital stopover point for migratory birds navigating from the Yellow River Basin to the Central Asian highlands, turning this mountain into a literal waypoint of life in a sea of dust. Hiking through Yunwushen is a surreal experience. Trails wind through old-growth forest, up steep ridges that suddenly open to dizzying views of dry plains and far-off mountain silhouettes. Occasionally, the ruins of an old Taoist shrine or hermit hut will appear, some still bearing faint calligraphy on their stone walls, or rusted incense burners left untouched for decades. In some groves, travelers have tied red ribbons and left offerings of fruit or coins, keeping alive traditions that predate modern memory. One such path, known locally as the Cloud Ladder, climbs steeply up the southern slope and is said to be a place where those burdened by grief can walk in silence and feel their sorrow lifted away by the wind. But perhaps the most unreal quality of Mount Yunwu is its silence. Here, the roar of the modern world fades to a whisper. There is no constant hum of traffic, No buzz of electricity, only the wind in the pines, the distant call of a hawk, the gentle rustle of leaves. Even during the warmer months, when some tourists arrive to escape the heat of the plains below, there is a hush to the mountain that feels ancient and sacred. At sunset, the light turns golden and slants low across the dry landscape, making the mountain seem to glow from within. The forested slopes take on a deep green hue tinged with amber, while the desert plains beyond shimmer with heat and shadow. From the summit, the land unfolds in every direction, northward to the Helan Mountains, westward to the boundless Gobi, southward toward the Lurs Plateau. It is a panorama that defies expectation, a meeting of extremes, a place where life clings with impossible tenacity to the fringes of nothingness. Mount Yunwu is not famous in the way that the Himalayas or Mount Amay are. It doesn't draw pilgrimages by the thousands, nor is it emblazoned across travel brochures. But for those who find it, who tread softly through its shaded groves or sit quietly in its wind-chiseled temples, it offers something rarer, a living paradox. A mountain that should not be so lush. A forest that defies its arid context. A silent realm that speaks directly to the soul. Mount Qianping, also known as Changpingshan, lies nestled within the fertile plains of Jiangsu province, just west of Suzhou, a city famed for its classical gardens, canals, and ancient scholarly culture. Though relatively modest in elevation, only rising to a few hundred meters, Changpingshan is a masterclass in subtle grandeur, a mountain where history, poetry, and landscape artistry fuse into a timeless expression of Chinese cultural refinement. Unlike the towering granite spires of Sanqing or the mist-draped wilderness of Yunwu, Mount Qianping does not overwhelm with sheer physical scale. Instead, it captivates with quiet beauty and layered significance. Its name, Qianping, or Heavenly Peace, hints at its tranquil disposition. This is a mountain where every tree, every rock, and every ripple of water seems to whisper the language of poets and sages. In imperial times, it was a favorite retreat of scholars, painters, and literati who came not to conquer nature but to converse with it. The first striking element of Changpingshan is its natural layout, which reflects classical Chinese aesthetics of shan shui, mountain and water balance. Springs bubble up near the base and trickle down through shallow ravines, feeding mirror-like ponds that reflect the sky and surrounding pines with painterly perfection. These waters have long been integrated into the mountain's scenic design, giving rise to famed features like the Nine Dragon Spring, where multiple streams converge in a gurgling, jade-colored basin said to resemble dragons twisting together in play. The flora of Changpingshan is equally curated by both nature and time. Old-growth trees, some several hundred years old, line stone-paved paths that ascend gently up the slope. Ancient ginkgos, red maples, pines, and Chinese tallow trees provide a shifting seasonal palette. Pale blossoms in spring, rich green canopies in summer, a flamboyant blaze of red and gold in autumn, and snow-dusted silhouettes in winter. The fall foliage, in particular, draws visitors from across Jiangsu and Shanghai, as the mountain transforms into a living Incan wash painting. Fiery leaves set against grey stone, misty ponds, and quiet pavilions. One of the most defining aspects of Qianping's allure is its deep historical resonance. The mountain is forever linked with Fan Zhongyan, one of China's most revered Song dynasty scholars and statesmen. Born in Suzhou in 989 AD, Fan was a moralist, reformer, and poet whose famous dictum, "Be the first to worry about the world's troubles and the last to enjoy its pleasures," still echoes in Chinese thought today. Changpingshan, his ancestral home and resting place, is a memorial to his life and values. The Fan Zhongyan Memorial Hall, located halfway up the mountain, is a quiet complex of stone tablets, bronze statues, and traditional halls where visitors pay homage to this towering intellect. His tomb, set amid trees and inscribed pillars, is simple yet deeply moving, an austere tribute to a man who dedicated his life to justice, learning, and civic responsibility. Changpingshan is also notable for its striking rock formations. Scattered across its slopes are massive boulders and stone outcrops that seem sculpted by both erosion and artistic sensibility. One of the most iconic is the Flying Stone, a huge, flat-topped rock that rests precariously on a narrow base, as if it might lift into the air at any moment. This natural curiosity has been the subject of legends for centuries. One popular tale tells of an immortal who once rested on this stone and, upon ascending to the heavens, left behind his perch as a reminder of his visit. Nearby, weather-worn stones bear inscriptions carved by poets and monks, their elegant characters slowly fading into the face of the mountain, yet still echoing across time. In harmony with these features are man-made structures built in classical Suzhou style. Delicate pavilions with curved roofs, intricate latticework, and wooden pillars painted in earthy reds and golds offer spots to pause and appreciate the scenery. The Yudeotai Pavilion, situated near the summit, offers panoramic views over the Suzhou countryside. Mosaic fields, winding canals, and low-rise villages stretching to the horizon. At dawn, the landscape is often veiled in a gauzy mist that gives the illusion of floating above the world. At dusk, the sun turns the tiled rooftops below into a river of burnished copper. Cultural festivals bring the mountain to life in even more vivid ways. During the Chongyang Festival, an ancient tradition of climbing mountains in autumn to dispel misfortune and honor ancestors, Qianping becomes a place of pilgrimage. Locals gather to burn incense, recite poetry, and admire the changing leaves. Red ribbons flutter on trees where wishes are tied. The air fills with the sound of guzheng strings and flute melodies. Families picnic near pavilions while children chase each other around moss-covered stones. It is a fusion of joy, nostalgia, and reverence that seems carved from a more peaceful time. Another subtle, yet unforgettable experience is a walk along the ancient Scholars' Trail, a narrow path that weaves past lotus ponds, bamboo groves, and quiet reading huts. This path was once used by students and monks who came here to study and meditate. Etched stone plaques along the way quote classic Confucian, Taoist, and Buddhist texts, each passage carefully selected to match the surrounding mood. One such inscription, placed beside a still pond, reads, "Still waters reflect a quiet mind." Such moments of reflection are not mere decoration, they embody the spirit of the mountain itself. What truly makes Qianpingshan unreal, however, is not its elevation or even its beauty, but the way it distills the essence of classical Chinese harmony, where nature, culture, and spirit intertwine. It is a mountain where history is felt underfoot in every mossy stone, where the rustle of wind through leaves sounds like calligraphy being brushed across silk, where even the silence seems to speak with ancient wisdom. In a country of towering peaks and roaring rivers, Mount Qianping reminds us that the smallest mountain can contain the deepest meaning. Mount Jiulong, or Jigongshan, rises gracefully at the intersection of central China's Henan and Hubei provinces, just south of Shenyang city. Its name, literally Rooster Mountain, is inspired by its distinctive silhouette, a ridgeline shaped like the profile of a proud cockerel with its chest out and beak pointed skyward. But beneath this charming nomenclature lies one of the most unique and surreal landscapes in all of China, not solely for its natural features but for the strange and atmospheric confluence of east and west that unfolds across its pine-blanketed slopes. Mount Jiulong, standing around 800 meters above sea level, is not among China's tallest peaks. Yet it holds a singular place in history as one of the earliest and most atmospheric summer resorts built during the Republic of China era and the late Qing dynasty. The mountain's high elevation and temperate climate have made it a refuge from the sweltering heat of the Central Plains since antiquity, but it was during the early 20th century that it became a fashionable retreat for diplomats, missionaries, scholars, and Chinese officials seeking both cool air and cosmopolitan company. What makes Mount Jiulong truly unreal is this rich layering of colonial-era architecture, hidden in the mists and pine forests like something out of a forgotten European town transplanted into the heart of China. Unlike many of China's sacred or imperial mountains, Jigongshan is not dominated by Taoist or Buddhist temples. Instead, the slopes are studded with over 300 Western-style villas, many constructed between the 1890s and 1930s, showcasing an eclectic mix of British, German, French, Russian, and American influences. These structures are surreal in their placement, red-tiled roofs peeking through dense bamboo, wrought iron balconies overlooking granite cliffs, and colonial-style chimneys rising beside ancient pines and camellia shrubs. The villas, originally built as summer homes or retreats, formed what came to be known as the Mount Jiulong International Summer Resort. At its height in the 1920s and 1930s, it was referred to as Asia's second Davos, attracting not just European missionaries but also Chinese literati, scientists, and revolutionaries. Each villa had its own personality and name, some whimsically called things like the Castle, Red Roof House, or the Pavilion of Morning Clouds. Their walls still bear faded crests, and some still contain antique fireplaces, carved wood mantels, and creaking staircases that whisper of parties, political discussions, and quiet summer evenings lost to time. Among the most prominent structures is the Beilin Villa, where early Republican officials once held meetings. Another iconic building is the Church of Christ, a Gothic-style stone chapel surrounded by wildflowers and mountain laurel, with arched stained-glass windows still intact. Walking through these areas feels like wandering through a European mountain village that has been quietly overtaken by the Chinese forest. Ivy now clings to once bustling walls, moss curls along stone balustrades, and nature is slowly, dreamily reclaiming these relics. But Jiulong is not merely an open-air museum of colonial architecture. Its natural beauty is every bit as haunting and surreal. The slopes are cloaked in thick stands of black pine, cypress, azalea, and tea trees, many of which are centuries old. The air is cool and fragrant, even in the height of summer, and mists roll infrequently, wrapping the mountain in soft, dreamlike veils. The forest undergrowth is alive with birdsong and the rustle of squirrels, while butterflies drift through shafts of sunlight that pierce the canopy. Numerous stone paths and staircases, many built over 100 years ago, wind up and down the mountain. One of the most iconic trails leads to the Rooster's Head, the rock outcrop that resembles a rooster's comb and beak. From here, one can look out over a panorama of the Debi mountain range, a sea of green hills that rolls endlessly toward the horizon. In the early morning, clouds often pool in the valleys below, giving the illusion that the mountain is floating above a celestial ocean. Further enriching the surreal atmosphere is the mountain's deep association with literary and intellectual history. Renowned Chinese writer and translator Guo Maruo once resided here, as did prominent educators and scientists who fled the chaos of war for peaceful contemplation in these lofty surroundings. Plaques near some villas tell the stories of these residents, their works, philosophies, and legacies. It is said that on quiet summer nights, the sounds of typewriters and piano music once mingled with the rustling pines, echoing softly down into the valleys. Another remarkable feature is Jiulong's transformation across the 4 seasons. In spring, the mountain erupts in blossoms, cherry, azalea, and mountain peach. In summer, the thick canopy offers shade and coolness rare for the region. Autumn brings a blaze of red and gold, with leaves carpeting stone stairways like a path to a forgotten temple. And in winter, rare snowfalls cloak the villas in silence and white mystery, transforming the entire mountain into a scene out of a European fairy tale. Today, Jiulong is being rediscovered and restored. Many of the villas have undergone careful renovations, and the mountain is now a protected cultural and ecological area. Museums and galleries have been installed in some of the old buildings, offering exhibits on the mountain's architecture, ecology, and unique East-West heritage. However, great care has been taken to preserve the serenity and wildness of the site. Mass tourism is limited, signage is discreet, paths are maintained with a light hand. This helps retain the slightly haunted, ethereal atmosphere that makes Jiulong so remarkable. In the end, what makes Mount Jiulong unreal is not only its fusion of natural and architectural beauty, but its dreamlike sense of dislocation from time and place. Where else can you walk through a pine forest in rural China and find yourself face to face with a forgotten European manor? Where else can you watch a summer thunderstorm roll over tiled rooftops while a layer of mist blankets a Gothic chapel in bamboo shadow? Mount Jiulong is a memory, a mirage, a gentle ghost of history that has chosen to linger in the highland mists. Mount Qiun, or Qiunshan, rises with ethereal grace in southern Anhui province, standing quietly near the city of Huangshan yet cloaked in a mysticism all its own. Though it may be less internationally renowned than its neighbor, the legendary Yellow Mountain, Qiunshan holds a spiritual magnetism that stretches across centuries of Taoist tradition, poetry, philosophy, and devotion. Recognized as one of China's 4 sacred Taoist mountains, it's not just a place to be visited, it's a realm to be entered. Unlike towering peaks or snow-draped summits that dazzle with sheer vertical scale, Qiunshan is modest in height, peaking at just 585 meters, 1,919 feet, above sea level. But what it lacks in grandeur, it more than compensates for in symbolism, geological strangeness, and sacred atmosphere. The name itself, or equal to the clouds, is a poetic description that evokes the mountain's signature experience, the sensation of floating within or above the clouds, as veils of mist dance between red cliffs, stone ridges, and ancient temples that seem to defy gravity. The geological makeup of Qiunshan contributes immensely to its dreamlike presence. The mountain is composed of Danxia landforms, unique red sandstone formations that have eroded into dramatic cliffs, isolated spires, and natural platforms. These formations are frequently pierced with caves and overhangs, which over centuries have been transformed into shrines, residences, and meditation spaces. Some appear as if grown naturally into their setting. Others emerge with straight-cut edges and engraved stonework, subtly revealing the touch of human hands guided by spiritual reverence rather than conquest. Qiunshan's status as a Taoist holy mountain stretches back over a millennium. It was especially prominent during the Tang and Song dynasties, when Taoism saw widespread support and development. Here, among rock ledges and hidden groves, Taoist sages meditated, cultivated inner alchemy, and composed verses that became foundational to Chinese spiritual literature. Today, their legacy lives on in both active temples and stone inscriptions, dozens of which dot the cliffs like sacred graffiti left by immortals. At the heart of the mountain lies the Xiang Zhanren Temple, the main Taoist temple complex, which is dedicated to Sanfeng, a legendary Taoist immortal and martial arts master. Believed by many to be the creator of Tai Chi, the temple sits partway up the mountain on a natural stone terrace, a place where clouds frequently gather in thick, flowing rivers, lending the entire scene a sense of divine suspension. Visitors often describe standing there as being between worlds, the earthly below, the celestial above, and the mountain itself acting as a bridge. Numerous other shrines and monastic buildings cling to the cliffs or hide in the valleys. The Yunyang Cave is one of the most famous grottos on the mountain, a natural cavern adorned with ancient carvings and inscriptions. Another marvel is the Qianqi, Heavenly Pond, a tranquil alpine pool fed by rainfall and hidden amidst high crags, reflecting the sky so purely it seems like a portal to another world. In Taoist cosmology, water often symbolizes spiritual purity, reflection, and effortless motion, all qualities that permeate the experience of Qiunshan. But perhaps the most mesmerizing and surreal aspect of Qiunshan is the stone calligraphy gallery. Stretching across multiple cliff faces, this collection of over 200 stone inscriptions and carvings is like walking through a vertical scripture. These writings range from imperial poems and edicts to Taoist verses and personal dedications. Some were carved by emperors, others by monks, still others by wandering scholars seeking immortality through ink and chisel. They are not merely aesthetic. Each character is considered a ritual offering, a moment captured in the cosmic flow of Tao. Throughout its history, Mount Qiun has been revered not only by Taoists but also by literati and poets. The likes of Li Bai, the immortal Tang dynasty poet, wrote about Qiunshan, enchanted by its clouds and celestial calm. His verses speak of the mountain's elusive spirit, its dissolving boundaries between the real and the imagined. It's no surprise that many came here not to escape the world but to understand it better through immersion in nature's mystery. As one ascends Qiunshan, time itself begins to loosen its grip. The forest grows denser and more dreamlike, with pine, camphor, and bamboo wrapping the trails in green stillness. On particularly foggy mornings, the landscape vanishes and reappears, one temple after another emerging like apparitions from the mountain's breath. Lanterns flicker dimly through the mist, prayers drift faintly through incense-laced air, and stone paths snake through rock passages without ever clearly revealing their destination. Local legends and folklore are thick around Qiunshan. It's said that immortals descend during the Lunar New Year to bless the mountain, and that certain caves within the rock serve as gateways to the celestial realm, entrances used only by the worthy or enlightened. Pilgrims still leave offerings at shrines or light candles near sacred springs. Some believe the mountain itself is a conscious entity, a vessel of qi, spiritual energy, that responds to humility, sincerity, and stillness. The town at the base of Qiunshan, known as Yuhua Street, is another thread in the tapestry of the unreal. This old street of traditional architecture, with whitewashed walls and black-tiled roofs, serves as both a historical preservation area and an introduction to the mountain's spiritual ambience. Here, travelers can rest in tea houses, eat vegetarian Taoist meals, or browse antique shops full of charms, scrolls, and calligraphy. Unlike many tourist destinations, Qiunshan does not seek to overwhelm with spectacle. It invites inwardness. There is little in the way of loud advertisement or flashy amenities. The trails are quiet, the temples active with genuine practice, and the rhythm of the mountain remains anchored in Taoist principles. Simplicity, stillness, non-interference, and harmony with nature. In the modern age, Qiunshan continues to hold a timeless resonance. It remains an active site of Taoist learning and pilgrimage, a place for those seeking not just views but visions, not just walks but wanderings of the spirit. Whether through chanting monks echoing against ancient cliffs, or a sudden clearing in the clouds revealing stone spires like the bones of dragons, the mountain bestows experiences that feel more like lucid dreams than memories. Here, Tao is not an abstract concept. It is the breeze through cypress, the echo of footsteps on stone, the stillness of a pool reflecting sky and cloud, and the sensation that time has paused just long enough for your soul to breathe. Mount Sanqing is not a place one visits. It is a place one disappears into. Mount Erlang, or Erlangshan, is a formidable and deeply atmospheric presence rising in western Sichuan province, straddling the crucial transition zone between the humid, populous Sichuan basin and the elevated Tibetan plateau. Unlike many other sacred or scenic mountains in China, Mount Erlang's significance lies not only in its natural beauty, but also in its strategic, historical, and infrastructural role, particularly as a gateway to the Tibetan world. Standing at an altitude of about 3,437 meters, 11,276 feet, Mount Erlang's summit is often hidden beneath layers of thick fog, swirling clouds, and icy winds that sweep through its ridges. The mountain serves as part of the Qionglai mountain range, forming a formidable ecological and geological wall separating the eastern lowlands from the highland cultures and ecosystems of western Sichuan and eastern Tibet. This makes Erlangshan not just a mountain but a threshold between worlds, between monsoon-fed valleys and the cold, dry expanses of the plateau. Perhaps the most defining feature of Mount Erlang today is its engineering marvels, specifically, the Erlang Mountain Tunnel. For centuries, the mountain was a major bottleneck along the ancient southern Silk Road routes and later the Sichuan-Tibet Highway, one of the most treacherous roads in China due to frequent landslides, icy conditions, and narrow mountain paths. Travel over Mount Erlang used to be a perilous affair, especially in winter, when fog and snow would render the roads nearly impassable. This changed with the completion of the first Erlangshan Tunnel in 1999, a project that not only shortened the route between Huai'an and Luding, but also reduced the dangers posed by high-altitude travel. The first tunnel, over 4 kilometers long, was once the longest road tunnel in China and a symbol of Chinese engineering conquering nature. But even that achievement was surpassed by the second Erlangshan Tunnel, completed in 2018, which stretches nearly 13.5 kilometers through solid mountain rock. This newer tunnel is one of the longest road tunnels in China and has drastically improved transport between Chengdu and the Tibetan borderlands, making the once difficult route smoother, faster, and safer. Yet the existence of these tunnels has not diminished Mount Erlang's raw, untamed presence. The region remains wild, windswept, and incredibly biodiverse. The mountain is cloaked in dense alpine forests, with lower elevations dominated by broadleaf deciduous trees, which give way to spruce, fir, and rhododendron groves higher up. The undergrowth is often damp, fed by near-constant mist and the heavy rains that sweep in from the east. Streams and waterfalls trace the mountain's flanks like silver scars, tumbling into rocky gorges before merging into the Dardu River far below. The air at Mount Erlang is noticeably thinner, crisper, and colder than in the basin cities just hours away. Cloud banks cling to the cliffs throughout much of the year, lending the upper slopes an eerie, ghost-like quality. Travelers describe driving through the tunnels as entering another realm, emerging on the far side into a starker, brighter landscape of grasslands, Tibetan stone houses, and endless sky. The transition is psychological as much as physical, from the damp, green intimacy of Sichuan to the vast, sun-drenched openness of the Tibetan highlands. Despite its ruggedness, Mount Erlang is home to a variety of endemic species and plays a crucial role in the region's ecological balance. The area has been designated as part of a national nature reserve, with ongoing conservation efforts to protect its fragile environment. Golden snub-nosed monkeys, clouded leopards, and red pandas are among the rare species that still inhabit the remote upper reaches, though sightings are rare due to the mountain's steep, inaccessible terrain. The cultural significance of Erlangshan also runs deep. According to local folklore, the mountain is named after Erlangshun, a powerful deity in Chinese mythology known for his third eye and his role as a guardian figure. Temples dedicated to Erlangshun can be found near the base and older trails of the mountain, and traditional festivals sometimes honor the mountain god with rituals, dances, and offerings, particularly among Han and Tibetan communities who live nearby. In Chinese legends, Erlangshun is known for subduing floods, taming mountains, and piercing illusion with his divine sight. themes that feel strikingly apt for a mountain pierced by tunnels and shrouded in fog. The old Erlang mountain road, which still exists parallel to the tunnels, is now used more for scenic drives and cycling expeditions. Known as the Sky Road, this route winds precariously along sheer cliffs and mountain spurs, offering breathtaking views of ravines, hanging bridges, and emerald valleys below. Although modern infrastructure has made this road less essential, it retains a legendary status among adventurers, truckers, and nostalgic travelers who want to experience what used to be one of the most dangerous passages in Western China. In spring and early summer, rhododendrons burst into bloom, painting the slopes in shades of pink, white, and crimson. Fog drapes across the ridges, making the trees look like they are suspended in air. At sunrise, the mists sometimes part briefly to reveal sunlight slanting through mossy branches, creating fleeting moments of sublime beauty. In winter, snow transforms the upper slopes into a frozen dreamscape, the sharp spires and frost-covered trees reflecting a cold serenity that feels untouched by time. Unlike more manicured mountain parks, Mount Erlang retains a strong sense of wilderness and unpredictability. The weather can shift from sunshine to hail in minutes. Landslides are still a threat in the monsoon season. And yet, this unpredictability is part of what makes the mountain feel so alive, like a guardian force watching over the threshold between east and west, old and new, lowland and highland. Today, for many Chinese and international travelers heading west toward Kangding, Ganzi, or the Greater Tibetan Plateau, crossing Mount Erlang, whether through the tunnels or via the old road, is an initiation rite. It marks the moment when city life and modern routine give way to altitude, sky temples, prayer flags, and yaks grazing beneath glacier. The mountain is a physical barrier, yes, but also a psychological and cultural portal. To cross Erlangshan is to leave one world and enter another, feeling, if only for a moment, the breathless vastness of a land where nature, myth, and survival have coexisted for centuries. Mount Jintai, known in Chinese as Jintaishan, rises in the Gansu province of northwestern China, a region defined by arid plateaus, ethnic intersections, and the slow, sweeping transformation of land between desert and highland. Jintaishan does not loom as dramatically as the glacial peaks of Tibet or the jagged karst towers of southern China. Instead, it stands with a quiet, commanding presence over a landscape shaped by sand, wind, and centuries of spiritual passage. Located in the region surrounding Jinta County, from which the mountain takes its name, Mount Jintai is best understood not as an isolated geological spectacle, but as a place where terrain, history, and culture converge in uniquely evocative ways. The mountain itself is not particularly tall, but it rises in stark contrast to the golden and rust-colored lowlands of the Hushi Corridor, a stretch of land that once served as one of the main arteries of the ancient Silk Road. From its slopes, one can gaze out over expanses of sandy valleys, where dry riverbeds shimmer in the heat and winds sweep across stony plains that stretch toward the distant horizon. The desert landscape, at first glance, seems harsh and empty, but Mount Jintai's setting reveals layers of subtle richness. The surrounding area is part of eastern Gansu, a region long shaped by a mixing of Han Chinese, Tibetan, Hui Muslim, and Mongolian cultures, each leaving spiritual and architectural traces in the shadow of the hills. Climbing the mountain's ridges is to experience an environment both austere and meditative. The lower slopes are dotted with shrubs, dry grasses, and occasionally, juniper or pine, clinging stubbornly to the rocky terrain. In spring and early summer, desert flowers briefly emerge, bright purples and yellows that vanish almost as quickly as they appear. The air is dry and clear, with visibility stretching for kilometers in every direction. It's not uncommon to see dust devils dancing in the distance, or herds of goats being driven across the valleys by solitary shepherds. What elevates Mount Jintai from a mere scenic rise to an unreal place, however, is its spiritual resonance, particularly with respect to Tibetan Buddhism and Tibetan cultural memory. Despite being firmly within Gansu, far from the heartland of the Tibetan Autonomous Region, Mount Jintai is located along an important cultural frontier. The influence of Amdo Tibetan culture, which historically extended into this region, can still be felt strongly here, and the mountain itself hosts or lies near monasteries and temples that bear Tibetan architectural and religious hallmarks. Prayer flags flutter along some of the ridgelines, hung by locals and pilgrims who still make offerings to mountain spirits. These colorful strips of cloth, inscribed with mantras, catch the wind and scatter their blessings across the barren valley below. In some quiet corners of the mountain or along paths well worn by hooves and sandals, you may stumble across many stones, rocks carved with Buddhist prayers, placed there over generations. This spiritual layering speaks to the mountain's historical role as a waypoint. Mount Jintai lies along routes that connected central China to Tibetan communities further west, and it was often a stopover for monks, traders, and wandering ascetics. Pilgrims moving from one monastic complex to another would sometimes pause here, meditating in caves or leaving offerings on ledges. There are even local legends that speak of saints and sages who fasted and received visions on its summit. In more recent centuries, during the Qing dynasty and into the Republican era, the area around Jintaishan also served a strategic military and trading role, controlling access between the interior and the outer deserts. The remains of ancient watchtowers and outposts still dot nearby hills, standing as silent witnesses to centuries of borderland skirmishes and caravan crossings. These remnants, half buried in sand, blend almost seamlessly with the rock formations around them, giving the landscape an air of timeless solitude. Modern travelers who make the journey to Jintaishan often do so for its solitude, its panoramic desert views, and its sense of cultural echo, as if the mountain were listening still to the footsteps of monks, traders, and warriors long gone. It's not a typical tourist site. There are few handrails, no cable cars, no major signs to guide you. But this only deepens its allure. One could stand at a craggy outcrop near the summit, the wind whispering across the bare rocks, and feel suspended in time, far removed from the pulse of modern China. From here, the transition between ecological zones is starkly visible. In one direction lies the expanding Gobi, with its endless aridity and shimmering mirages. In another, the faint hints of more fertile valleys touched by mountain-fed streams. Occasionally, on the clearest of days, the shadows of distant snow-dusted ranges can be seen, shimmering faintly against the deep blue sky like mirages. Despite its relative obscurity in mainstream travel guides, Mount Jintai represents something profound, a threshold between worlds, between civilization and wilderness, between desert and mountain, between the Han heartland and the Tibetan cultural sphere. Its rocky face, weathered by sun and wind, holds a kind of silent gravitas, a place that demands stillness, contemplation, and respect. As China continues to modernize and expand infrastructure into its remotest corners, places like Mount Jintai stand as reminders of what cannot be paved over, the unspoken memory of landscapes, the sacredness of in-between spaces, and the layered identities that make China's borderlands so hauntingly beautiful. Mount Dushiku, or Dushikushan, is not merely a mountain, it is a living memory etched into stone and soil, where ancient fortifications meet the lonely beauty of the northern Hebei highlands. Situated near the old Dushiku Pass, this rugged and often windswept terrain was once a key gateway of the Great Wall of China, where the empire met the wild frontier. Today, it remains a profoundly atmospheric place, where history, geography, and silence converge with unshakable force. Located in the Guifeng County region of Hebei province, Mount Dushiku's claim to uniqueness lies not in towering height or exotic vegetation, but in the way it blends natural ruggedness with ancient engineering, and the way its very stones seem to remember the clatter of hooves, the watchful gaze of soldiers, and the endless tension of defending the known world from the unknown. The word Dushiku translates roughly to solitary stone pass, an evocative name that hints at the lone granite formations that dominate parts of the landscape. The mountain slopes rise in layers, like massive ribs jutting from the earth, cut by time, frost, and the hand of man. These aren't lush slopes covered in thick vegetation, but rather grasslands and sparse scrub, windswept and brittle, giving way to barren outcrops and narrow ridgelines where the earth seems to crumble into the sky. The Great Wall, at this segment, runs directly across the highland terrain of Mount Dushiku. Unlike the meticulously restored sections at Badaling or Muxianyu, the wall here is often crumbling, overgrown, and eerily silent. Watchtowers lean at odd angles, bricks scatter along the path, and portions of rammed earth construction reveal the layered techniques used to build this defensive wonder over 5 centuries ago. And yet, even in decay, the wall here feels more authentic, more solemn, as if its true character is more visible when allowed to age in peace. The Dushiku section of the Great Wall was originally fortified during the Ming dynasty, especially under the command of General Qi Jiulong, who revolutionized military architecture and troop organization during the 16th century. It served as one of the main routes into the interior, a heavily defended corridor watching over northern incursions from the Mongolian steppes. Even today, Walking these ridges evokes a deep sense of isolation, the kind that soldiers must have felt as they looked out across endless rolling hills, uncertain of what the horizon might bring. The terrain itself is dry and harsh, with only seasonal wildflowers and hardy grasses breaking the monotony of color. In winter, the wind howls across the ridge like a spectral choir, and the snow dusts the old stonework in a pale shroud. In summer, the air is clear but dry, and the sun casts hard shadows against the crumbling towers and cracked battlements. It is not the kind of beauty that dazzles, it is the kind that stays with you, austere, quiet, and strangely magnetic. One of the most surreal features of Mount Sanqing is its network of forgotten trails, some of which diverge from the wall and snake down into hidden valleys and rocky outcrops, leading to abandoned military outposts, centuries-old beacon towers, and even collapsed signal piers. These were once used to send smoke signals in the daytime and fire beacons at night to warn of approaching enemies, forming a vast and efficient communication system across the northern border. If you venture deeper into the landscape beyond the main ridgeline, you'll also find ghost villages, tiny hamlets built of stone and clay, now abandoned or inhabited only by a handful of elderly residents. These villages were once outposts that supported the garrisons manning the wall, offering food, repair services, and even basic medical care. Today, their courtyards lie silent, their walls scarred by time and erosion, windows like blind eyes staring out across the brittle grasslands. But perhaps the most moving aspect of Mount Sanqing is the sense of memory embedded in silence. Unlike the bustling tourist corridors of Beijing's wall segments, here you are alone. You can sit atop a weathered battlement and listen to nothing but the wind and your heartbeat. The air is so still at times that you can hear the rustle of a grasshopper or the soft flap of a bird's wings 100 meters away. The Great Wall, often romanticized in tales of emperors and warriors, becomes something more visceral and human here. You feel the fatigue in the stones, the weariness of centuries spent waiting for enemies who may never come. This is not to say the mountain lacks life. In spring, flocks of migratory birds sweep across the ridges, and small mammals, such as foxes and rabbits, scurry across the scrubland. Ancient junipers twist from between cracks in the rock, gnarled and defiant. Shepherds from nearby villages occasionally drive their goats across the hills, following paths their ancestors took for generations. Some locals still tell stories passed down about bandits, imperial scouts, or mysterious figures seen near the old towers at dusk. There is also a modest but growing movement to preserve the less glamorous sections of the wall, and Mount Sanqing has attracted interest from historians and preservationists who see value in its unpolished authenticity. But it remains, for now, largely untouched by mass tourism. No glass walkways, no souvenir stands, no cable cars. What you bring, you must carry. What you see, you must discover with your own 2 feet. In essence, Mount Sanqing is where the myth of the Great Wall becomes flesh. Here, it is no longer a symbol of national pride polished for postcards, but a weathered scar on the landscape, a record of fear, vigilance, and the vast scale of human effort to hold the line between the known and the wild. It is a place that humbles and grounds you, where the stone and wind whisper the truth of history far louder than any guidebook ever could. Far from the ancient battlements of the Central Plains and the sun-warmed terraces of the south, Mount Sanqing lies in the frigid, forest-clad northern reaches of Inner Mongolia, where China brushes the edge of Siberia. Here, the air is brisk even in summer, the forests stretch endlessly like a sea of green flames, and the terrain rises into soft alpine folds beneath a boundless blue sky. This region, known collectively as the Sanqing National Forest Park, encompasses not only the mountain itself but the surrounding Greater Khingan Range, Jiulong, China's northernmost forested mountain chain and a place of tiger-like grandeur, elemental beauty, and remote wilderness. The name Sanqing comes from the language of the Evenki people, one of China's oldest and most storied ethnic minorities. It means to set out on horseback, and the name is no accident. This region has long been the realm of horsemen, hunters, and herders, a land where nomadic culture is carved into the rhythm of the seasons. For thousands of years, reindeer herders, shamans, and forest tribes thrived in this area, living in close communion with nature amid the coniferous canopy. Mount Sanqing itself isn't a single dramatic peak like those found in Yunnan or Sichuan. Instead, it consists of a series of rounded, forested summits, rising like waves from the vast boreal forest. These mountains are often blanketed in Korean pine, larch, fir, and spruce, with a thick understory of birch, aspen, and moss-covered stone. It is a landscape far more reminiscent of Russia or northern Canada than traditional images of China. In fact, this is the only region of China that is home to true taiga, a cold-adapted biome that dominates the upper reaches of the northern hemisphere. In winter, the mountain becomes a monochrome world of snow-laden branches, glittering ice crystals, and silent forests, save for the distant cry of a hawk or the crunch of deer hooves on the powdery floor. Temperatures plummet far below freezing, often reaching -40°C, and the world seems locked in suspended time. Elk, sables, snow hares, and even the elusive Siberian flying squirrel make their home here. And though sightings are rare, the region is also known to be a migratory corridor for the Amur leopard and Siberian tiger, two of the most endangered big cats on Earth. Spring and summer bring the reawakening of the landscape. Meltwater from snow feeds crystalline mountain streams, and thousands of species of wildflowers, fungi, and ferns erupt beneath the pines. Cloudberries, mushrooms, and medicinal herbs are gathered by locals and wandering foragers. Butterflies drift lazily between mossy glades, and the air is filled with the scent of pine resin, damp wood, and blooming lilac. The taiga, while quiet, is never truly still. Among the most magical features of Mount Moer-Daoga is the region's vast collection of pristine lakes, bogs, and meandering rivers. The Emine River winds gracefully through the forested valleys, its waters clear and cold. In autumn, this becomes a vision of pure surrealism. Golden birch leaves shimmer beside emerald conifers, their reflections dancing on the water beneath skies that often glow pink and lavender in the northern twilight. The fall foliage here rivals anything in New England or Japan, but is seen by far fewer eyes. Within the national park are numerous trails, lookout towers, and boardwalks that take visitors deep into the forest without disturbing its delicate ecology. The most famous of these is the Taiga Secret Trail, a poetic path that leads through dense woods to remote ridges and panoramic vistas. From the upper reaches of Moer-Daoga, on a clear day, one can see not only across Inner Mongolia but toward the borderlands of Heilongjiang and the distant Russian taiga beyond. The cultural texture of Mount Moer-Daoga is just as rich as its natural setting. The region is home to several ethnic communities, including Evenki, Orokan, Dor, and Mongol peoples, many of whom still retain elements of their traditional lifestyles. Wooden homes with steeply pitched roofs dot the valleys, their interiors warm with stoves fueled by pine logs. Horseback riding, archery, and shamanic rituals continue to be practiced, especially during seasonal festivals. Visitors may encounter totem poles, carved reindeer antlers, or ritual drums hidden among the forest villages, silent witnesses to a spiritual life deeply tied to the land. One of the rarest experiences to be had here is participation in a shamanic ceremony or solstice celebration, where locals offer thanks to the spirits of the mountain and forest. These rituals, often conducted at dawn or dusk near sacred trees or rock formations, involve drumming, chanting, and the burning of juniper branches. It is a window into a worldview in which every mountain, tree, and river possesses a soul, an animistic belief system preserved despite the passage of centuries and the encroachment of modernity. It is also worth noting that Mount Moer-Daoga has become a focus of China's environmental conservation efforts. After decades of overlogging and ecological damage, large areas of the forest were closed to timber harvesting, and reforestation and wildlife protection zones were established. Today, it stands as a symbol of what nature can recover when given time and respect. It is also increasingly promoted as a destination for ecotourism, though with strict rules in place to preserve its wild character. In the stillness of Mount Moer-Daoga, it's easy to lose track of time. The trees stretch skyward like cathedral pillars, and the forest floor is so thick with moss and silence that your footsteps feel almost sacrilegious. Whether you're standing beneath a centuries-old pine or gazing over the endless green waves from a frostbitten ridge, there's a strange and beautiful truth that settles over you. This is the edge of the world, not in distance, but in spirit. And on that edge, the land whispers the old songs of migration, survival, and sacred solitude. Tucked into the historical heartland of China, where the echoes of emperors still seem to linger in the soil, rises Mount Hualong, a relatively little-known mountain in Shaanxi province, yet one that holds a silent, brooding mystique all its own. With limestone cliffs, ancient cave temples, and a landscape where stone and sky seem to embrace in eerie harmony, Hualongshan exudes a sacred austerity. It is a place of hidden spirituality, of whispered prayers lost in the wind, and of timeless solitude that contrasts sharply with the bustling plains below. Unlike the more famous peaks of Huashan or Taibai, which dominate the Shaanxi skyline with overwhelming force, Hualongshan rises quietly but defiantly, a mountain of subtle majesty rather than dramatic spectacle. Its elevation is moderate, but its vertical limestone walls are steep and imposing, weathered by centuries of rain, wind, and frost into natural buttresses and shadowy grottos. These rugged stone faces are pockmarked with small caves, many of which were hollowed by monks, hermits, or wandering sages during the Tang, Song, and Ming dynasties. The very name Hualong, which translates roughly to transforming dragon, hints at its deep spiritual symbolism. Local legend claims that this mountain was once a sleeping dragon who, upon hearing the bell of a nearby temple, transformed into stone out of reverence. The ridges and folds of the mountain, when seen from afar, do appear to undulate like the body of a coiled mythical creature, its head resting in the mists, its tail fading into the forested valleys. The most striking features of Mount Hualong are its rock-cut temples and shrines, many of which are built directly into cliff walls. Some are mere alcoves, carved by solitary ascetics who lived in seclusion for decades, their worldly possessions little more than a wooden bowl and a copy of the Tao Te Ching. Others are full-scale sanctuaries, ornately decorated with faded murals, Buddhist statues, and incense-blackened ceilings. These temples are often accessible only via steep stone stairways, narrow paths, or even iron chains bolted into the cliffsides, lending the entire place an air of secrecy and trial. Only the committed may ascend. One of the most famous of these is the Dragon Transformation Cave Temple, Hualong Bianhua Dong, nestled within a natural cleft in the rock. Its entrance is modest, a low archway overgrown with vines, but within lies a surprisingly spacious chamber filled with carved figures, some dating back over 1,000 years. Among these are depictions of Guanyin, Arhats, and Taoist immortals, each rendered with surprising delicacy given the tools and conditions available at the time. When sunlight pours through the cave mouth in the late afternoon, the walls seem to shimmer, and the air thickens with incense and the unshakable weight of history. Wandering through these temples, one often notices the silence. It is not the silence of emptiness, but of deep listening, an environment carved for contemplation, for tuning in to the rhythms of breath, stone, and spirit. Here, echoes do not bounce wildly but seem to sink into the rock, as if the mountain absorbs all sound in quiet reverence. Beyond the spiritual landmarks, Mount Hualong also offers an ecology distinct from the lowlands. The karst limestone geology gives rise to rugged cliffs, jagged spires, and narrow gorges, with plant life clinging desperately to every available crevice. Moss and lichen paint the stone in soft shades of green and grey, while vines wrap around twisted pine trees whose roots dangle from exposed cliff shelves. Wild medicinal herbs, such as gastrodia and rhodiola, grow in remote corners, gathered by local villagers who still practice traditional remedies. During spring, the mountain awakens with a gentle brilliance. Magnolias, azaleas, and wild cherry blossoms bloom along its slopes, lending fleeting color to its otherwise stoic palette. In autumn, the forest turns to fire, with maple reds and ginkgo golds glowing beneath the craggy outcrops. Mist is frequent here, especially in early morning, rising like a curtain from the valleys and giving the cliffs an otherworldly quality, as if floating islands had emerged from a sea of clouds. Inhabiting the surrounding forests are animals both common and rare. Crested goshawks, golden pheasants, and rhesus macaques can sometimes be spotted by patient hikers. The quietness of the region, far from major cities, means that these animals live with minimal disturbance, and bird calls echo clearly through the ridges. The local villages near the base of Mount Hualong preserve much of the old way of life. Homes are constructed of grey brick and timber, with tiled roofs and hand-carved eaves. Elders still practice calligraphy, tea ceremonies, and herbal alchemy, and often tell stories of the mountain's mystical past. Many believe that Hualongshan holds hidden caves still untouched, containing ancient scrolls or relics waiting to be rediscovered by the worthy. Another remarkable aspect of Mount Hualong is its ambiguous place in Chinese religious geography. While not one of the officially designated sacred mountains, it occupies a threshold space, a place where Buddhism, Taoism, and folk religion coexist without conflict. It's not uncommon to find a Taoist shrine just meters away from a Buddhist stupa, or to hear a local chant that invokes both deities and mountain spirits. This spiritual fluidity speaks to the deep syncretism of Chinese religious life, especially in rural areas where lived experience often outweighs doctrinal purity. Despite its beauty and cultural value, Mount Hualong remains relatively unknown to mass tourism, which has helped preserve its delicate charm. It lacks the commercial infrastructure of more famous sites. No cable cars, no neon signs, no souvenir gauntlets. Visitors here must hike, sweat, and sometimes scramble to reach the most rewarding spots. But the payoff is a kind of soulful isolation that is increasingly rare. For artists, poets, and seekers, Hualongshan has long served as a place of retreat and transformation. The Tang dynasty poet Meng Haoren was said to have visited this region, inspired by its meditative atmosphere and mountain vistas. More recently, it has attracted photographers, landscape painters, and spiritual pilgrims drawn to its moody light, forgotten paths, and the sense that time flows differently here. To walk through Mount Hualong is to enter a forgotten chapter of China's spiritual history, one written not in loud declarations or monumental sculptures, but in the weathered curves of limestone and the hush of incense smoke in a dark cave temple. It is not a place that shouts its wonder. It waits. It listens. And for those who come in humility and patience, it reveals itself slowly, like a scroll being unrolled under moonlight. Rising quietly in the northeast of Jiangxi province, near the city of Yang, Mount Guifeng is an often overlooked jewel in China's landscape of surreal and sacred peaks. Unlike the grand, cloud-wreathed summits of Huangshan or the towering escarpments of Huaishan, Guifengshan does not dazzle through scale alone. It enchants with quiet mystique, graceful granite formations, and meandering river valleys that seem to have been sketched by a scholar's brush. This mountain is not built to impress the hurried tourist, but rather to slowly unfold its poetry to the wandering soul who walks its stone paths with an open heart. The name Guifeng translates roughly to Jade Tablet Peak, a reference to the mountain's broad, flat-topped summit which, from a distance, resembles a sacred jade tablet once used by emperors to communicate with the heavens. Indeed, this mountain has long been associated with cultivation, contemplation, and harmony, themes evident in both its natural contours and its cultural history. At first glance, what distinguishes Mount Guifeng is its collection of massive granite boulders, many stacked in bizarre and seemingly impossible arrangements. These ancient stones, rounded, fissured, and weathered by countless millennia, give the landscape a surreal, even whimsical air. One might encounter formations shaped like reclining beasts, mythical turtles, or silent monks seated in eternal meditation. Unlike the sharp, blade-like karst peaks common in southern China, Guifeng's granite gives it a softer yet more primordial appearance, as if the earth here formed in a different age altogether. These boulders are not just geological wonders, they are living totems, woven into local folklore and spirituality. 1. Famed formation is the Guifeng seal stone, a rectangular boulder that sits precariously on a flat base, looking like a monumental ink seal waiting to imprint its ancient wisdom. Villagers believe this stone brings wisdom and clarity, and scholars used to visit it before examinations to gain seal-like approval from heaven. Winding between the granite giants are forest trails shaded by maple, pine, and camphor, offering shelter from both sun and modern noise. Mosses and lichens soften the rocky surfaces, and in wetter seasons, small streams trickle over stone, forming miniature waterfalls that sing through the undergrowth. It is in these wooded paths, sometimes stone-paved, sometimes earthen, that the true magic of Guifeng is found. The sound of wind through leaves, the rustle of unseen animals, and the fragrance of soil mixed with mountain mist. Adding to this sense of serenity are the river bends and lake-like pools that surround and bisect the landscape. The Guifeng Reservoir, an artificial lake constructed decades ago, now mirrors the mountain's cliffs and forests so perfectly that it feels more like an extension of the sky than a man-made body of water. Around its banks are wooden pavilions, stone arch bridges, and willow-fringed walkways, all blending naturally with the setting, inviting quiet reflection. At dawn or dusk, when the mist hovers low and the sun hangs close to the horizon, the reflections become ghostly and dreamlike, a mirrored world of stillness. One remarkable trait of Guifengshan is its relative freedom from mass tourism. It remains largely off the radar, despite being accessible by car and within reach of several large towns. This means that one can often hike for hours without encountering another visitor, an increasingly rare experience in a country known for its bustling scenic spots. The facilities are modest, simple guest houses, small local eateries, and minimal signage. But for those who yearn for a more authentic communion with nature, this is a blessing rather than a limitation. The cultural life of the region adds further depth. Nestled near the foot of the mountain is Guifeng Temple, a serene Buddhist monastery with bright orange-tiled roofs and quiet courtyards echoing with the soft clink of wind chimes. Though smaller than the great temples of Amei or Putuo, it possesses an unassuming devotional purity, with its incense offerings, chantings, and hand-copied sutras lending a spiritual rhythm to the place. Monks here tend vegetable gardens on terrace slopes, speak softly with visitors, and occasionally lead guided meditations overlooking the valley below. But spirituality here is not limited to Buddhism. Scattered through the mountain are stone steles, pavilions, and shrines dedicated to local deities, often tucked under granite overhangs or hidden deep in forest alcoves. These places blend folk Taoism, ancestor worship, and nature reverence, demonstrating the layered spiritual practices that define much of rural China. Many locals believe that the mountain is watched over by the spirit of an immortal scholar, who grants insight and serenity to those who approach with sincerity and respect. Guifeng also holds seasonal beauty that shifts subtly but powerfully throughout the year. In spring, the trails bloom with wild camellias and rhododendrons, and mist rises thick and low, cloaking the forest in an almost dreamlike atmosphere. In summer, the mountain teems with birdsong, dragonflies skim the surface of reflective pools, and vines drip down from tree branches like strands of jade. Autumn transforms the deciduous slopes into a tapestry of crimson and gold, especially when morning fog rolls in and turns the forest into a painting. And winter, though quieter, has its own magic. Frost clings to pine needles, and a hush falls over the mountain as if even time has slowed its step. The wildlife of Guifeng is surprisingly rich for its relatively modest elevation. Masked civets, squirrels, pheasants, and even the elusive serow have been spotted here. The bird life is especially notable, with species like the black-throated tit, grey-headed woodpecker, and Chinese bulbul darting between branches or calling from treetops. At night, the forest comes alive with the sounds of frogs, crickets, and owls, making the mountain feel less like a backdrop and more like a breathing entity. A particularly poignant moment awaits those who climb to the summit ridgeline. From here, the layered hills of Jiangxi roll out like ocean waves, their silhouettes softened by haze and history. The view is vast, but not intimidating. It's as if the land is exhaling beneath you. The wind whispers here too, carrying with it the scent of pines and stone and the subtle memory of all those who have passed this way before. In that moment, Guifeng doesn't feel like a place on a map. It feels like a place inside you, a sanctuary that touches something primal, something quiet and eternal. It is easy to see why poets and painters of old came to mountains like Guifeng to escape the world. It is a mountain that does not demand admiration. It invites it gently. It does not roar with spectacle, but hums with peace, patience, and old wisdom. To walk its paths is not just to visit a place, but to step into a slower rhythm, to reacquaint oneself with the poetry of stillness, and to feel the ancient soul of the land that China holds in its bones. Hidden within the heart of Yun Province, the Xuefeng Mountains, Xuefeng, rise like a veined backbone across the region's interior. A long, forested, and mist-laced range that weaves together history, ecology, and spiritual legacy. Unlike the more celebrated peaks of the Five Great Mountains or the vertiginous cliffs of Zhangjiajie, the Xuefeng Range does not command with spectacle but rather envelops with atmosphere, blanketing the land in soft fog, echoing with bird calls, and protecting valleys where time seems suspended. These mountains are a place of deep quietude, intimate biodiversity, and temples older than memory, standing sentinel in places even the sun forgets for a while. Stretching roughly northwest to southeast, the Xuefeng Mountains form a natural divide between Yun's eastern and western basins. Their average elevation rarely exceeds 1,500 meters, yet their reach and ecological impact far surpass what numbers might suggest. The range's terrain is deeply folded, with multiple ridges running parallel, interspersed by ravines, gorges, and narrow rivers. These natural corridors host some of the richest subtropical biodiversity in southern China and have historically provided shelter to both monastics and rebels, philosophers and farmers alike. The name Xuefeng literally means snow peak, yet snow is rare on all but the highest summits. The name is less a meteorological description than an emotional evocation, a reflection of the way mist gathers at the ridge's crowns in early mornings and late afternoons, rolling like slow-moving clouds, transforming the landscape into something ghostly and sacred. From afar, the peaks appear dusted in pale silver, as if powdered by snow, even under summer sun. This visual illusion is part of what gives the mountains their otherworldly mystique. Unlike some of China's better-known sacred mountains that attract organized pilgrimage traffic, the Xuefeng Mountains retain a decentralized spirituality, where old temples and shrines are woven into nature, not staged atop dramatic cliffs. Many of these temples were established during the Tang and Song dynasties, rooted in a blend of Chan, Zen, Buddhism, Taoist mysticism, and local spirit worship. The most famous of these is Xuefeng Temple, nestled within a secluded pine grove near Shuangpai County. Founded over 1,000 years ago, this temple became an influential center for Chan Buddhism and is said to be the birthplace of several notable monks whose teachings spread across China and into Japan and Korea. The temple complex itself is unpretentious: wooden halls with tiled roofs, stone paths covered in moss, small lotus ponds, and a bell tower that still tolls at dawn and dusk. The air is thick with the scent of incense and the occasional sound of sutras being chanted in a cadence that seems to match the rhythm of the surrounding forest. Local villagers still visit the temple not just for prayer but also to bring offerings of herbs and mountain vegetables to the monks, continuing a symbiosis that has lasted for centuries. Aside from spiritual life, the Xuefeng Mountains are an ecological sanctuary, home to a remarkable variety of flora and fauna. Its elevation gradient and high humidity create microclimates that support a range of ecosystems, from bamboo groves and evergreen broadleaf forests at lower altitudes, to oak, maple, and conifer stands higher up. Over 2,000 species of vascular plants have been documented here, many of which are medicinal herbs traditionally harvested by local healers. The fauna is equally fascinating. The forests provide cover for elusive mammals such as the Chinese serow, muntjac deer, and masked palm civets. In more remote areas, there have been occasional sightings of the clouded leopard, although it remains uncertain if viable populations still exist here. The range is also a haven for birdlife, including species like the silver pheasant, crested goshawk, Asian paradise flycatcher, and Chinese wamai, whose haunting song echoes through the canopy at dusk. A walk through the Xuefeng Range, particularly along one of its many forgotten stone trails, is a journey into layered time. These trails, often overgrown but still passable, were once ancient trade and pilgrimage routes, some of which date back over a millennium. They meander past terraced farms, ruined hermitages, and wayside shrines, often half hidden behind vines or nestled under crags where pilgrims would stop to rest or pray. The landscape here is not just scenic, it is storied, embroidered with the subtle marks of those who have passed before. Many local communities, especially Tujia and Yao minority villages, still inhabit the mountain valleys and lower slopes, preserving languages, crafts, and agricultural techniques passed down through countless generations. Walking into one of these villages is like stepping into a different century. Stone-walled houses with slate-tiled roofs, wooden barns, and sun-drying herbs hanging from window frames tell stories of a life balanced between rugged self-reliance and a reverence for nature. Festivals here are intimate affairs, often featuring drum dances, folk songs, and rituals to honor mountain spirits, which are believed to guard the forests and streams. In terms of weather, Xuefeng is deeply influenced by the East Asian monsoon, bringing copious rainfall in summer and a mist-laden coolness even in the height of July. Autumn is perhaps the most ethereal season to visit. The forests blaze in reds, ambers, and saffrons, and the thinning fog allows for fleeting views of entire ridges unfolding like waves. During winter, the range enters a kind of dormancy. Snow dusts the higher peaks, the streams slow, and a meditative stillness cloaks the land. Interestingly, the Xuefeng Range has also had strategic significance throughout history. Its rugged, folded terrain provided cover for various resistance movements, especially during the late Qing era, the Republican period, and even during the Long March, when units of the Red Army crossed through here to avoid nationalist patrols. As a result, scattered among the peaks are Revolutionary-era monuments and hidden cave shelters that once served as command posts or safe havens, an altogether different kind of sacred space, carved by human struggle rather than divine serenity. Modern development has reached the fringes of the Xuefeng Mountains, but the interior remains largely protected through various forest reserves and ecological conservation zones. Limited eco-tourism initiatives have been launched in recent years, offering carefully managed trails and guided treks. However, the ethos here remains one of preservation over promotion. It is a mountain range that reveals itself slowly, and only to those who tread gently. To enter the Xuefeng Mountains is to enter a living museum of China's forgotten harmonies, a place where nature, belief, and memory coexist in near-perfect equilibrium. There is a patience to this land, a sense that even the trees and stones have learned to wait and watch. The mountain does not clamor for your attention. It offers it like a whisper on the wind, quiet as mist over moss, or the soft clack of prayer beads against ancient wood. And if you stop long enough to listen, Xuefeng will speak, not in words, but in the language of stillness, of ancient pines and forgotten prayers echoing through the veil of fog. Hidden in the green folds of Zhejiang province, near the borders of Lizhui and Suzhou, lies the verdant and mysterious expanse of Mount Jiulong, Jiulongshan, literally the Mountain of Nine Dragons. The name itself is poetic, hinting at the mountain's undulating ridgelines that resemble 9 dragons twisting through the mists and forests, each spine crowned with crags, cloaked in leaves, and traced by water. While Mount Jiulong is less famous on a national scale than some of China's more iconic peaks, it offers an immersive, storybook-like landscape filled with roaring waterfalls, dense subtropical forests, ancient stone walkways, and a spiritual aura that whispers rather than declares. It is a place where history and nature fuse quietly, offering refuge not only to rare animals and plants but also to those seeking stillness, heritage, and wonder. Jiulongshan's geography is sculpted by granite and shale, shaped over millennia by the region's generous rainfall and tectonic uplift. Its ridges rise to modest elevations, typically between 800 and 1,200 meters, with the tallest peaks occasionally exceeding that, but their compact, craggy forms give them an outsized visual presence. These peaks are neither harsh nor barren, but instead wrapped in layers of evergreen foliage, moss-draped stone, and water-veined ravines, making them spectacularly alive and ever-changing throughout the year. The 9 dragons of the mountain refer not only to the topographical ridges but also to the 9 significant waterfalls that cascade from the mountain's higher elevations into the valleys below. These waterfalls, each with its own local legend, form the emotional heartbeat of Jiulongshan. Some drop straight off cliffs into deep plunge pools, while others tumble in graceful vales over stepped stone, catching the sunlight in shimmering arcs. The most famous among them is Jiulong Waterfall, a multi-tiered cascade that drops nearly 100 meters over a series of jagged stone steps into a broad, jade-green basin. In summer, the falling water roars like a dragon's breath, cooling the humid air and drawing clouds of mist that settle on the surrounding ferns and forest floor like delicate silk. In winter, during rare cold snaps, the spray turns to delicate ice lace, freezing in place like nature's calligraphy. Visitors who approach it along one of the old stone footpaths must first pass through bamboo groves and maple corridors, their footsteps echoing with the sounds of dripping water and the occasional call of a hidden bird. These ancient stone walkways are themselves a marvel. Known as shadao in the local dialect, these routes date back centuries, possibly to the Song or Ming dynasties, and were once used by monks, woodcutters, and traveling merchants navigating between villages. Cut directly into the mountain or laid in steps from quarried stone, the paths are often worn smooth by time and footsteps, and they climb steep slopes with a deliberate elegance, twisting along cliff edges, across mossy bridges, through tunneled groves, and past small altars tucked into crannies where incense still occasionally burns. Some of these paths lead to forgotten temples, hidden deeper in the forest, many in ruins, overtaken by vines and trees. One such temple is the Longyin Temple, which means dragon chant, named for the way the waterfall beside it sings against the stone walls. Though partially collapsed, its weathered wooden beams still carry intricate carvings of lotus flowers and guardian spirits, and its secluded setting makes it feel as though it were born from the mountain itself, rather than built atop it. The flora of Jiulongshan is thick and layered, forming an ecological tapestry that shifts with every 100 meters of elevation. At lower altitudes, you pass through dense bamboo forests, where the rustling of leaves and cracking of stalks fills the air with a soundscape of living motion. Moving upward, the bamboo gives way to stands of broadleaf evergreens, then to mixed forests where camphor trees, maples, and laurel grow side by side with ancient chinkapins and chestnuts. In spring, the slopes burst into bloom with wild azaleas, rhododendrons, and orchids, while autumn ignites the forest in a symphony of amber, gold, and scarlet hues. The animal life is equally diverse. The mountain is home to Chinese pangolins, civet cats, masked palm civets, and the occasional yellow-throated martin, alongside dozens of bird species including the crested goshawk, Chinese thrush, and fairy pitter, a brilliantly colored bird once thought rare, but now discovered nesting in these quiet corners. Local legends speak of dragons and guardian spirits dwelling in the heart of the forest, but in ecological terms, it's the presence of such elusive fauna that reflects the mountain's pristine and undisturbed core. Culturally, Jiulong serves as a cradle of intangible heritage passed down by the Xi ethnic minority and local Han villagers. Ancient songs, ritual dances, and woodblock printed texts tell of the mountain's importance as a site of both reverence and resistance. During the late Qing dynasty and Republican era, many revolutionaries and bandits used the secluded ridges and dense forests as hideouts and staging grounds, while monks and scholars found inspiration in the mountain's tranquility. Some ancient stele inscriptions still exist deep within the forest, commemorating lost temples, old poetry, or regional edicts from dynasties long past. Despite its natural and cultural wealth, Jiulong has remained largely off the beaten track, protected by its own remoteness and the restraint of local communities. Small ecotourism operations now exist, especially near the entrance valleys, where guided hikes and sustainable guesthouses allow for respectful immersion into the mountain's serenity. Yet even today, many trails deeper into the forest are unmarked, left untouched, known only to those who live in nearby villages or to the few dedicated travelers willing to wander without signage, relying instead on the natural flow of stone paths, water sounds, and instinct. What sets Mount Jiulong apart is not just its stunning scenery or biological richness, but the sensation of discovery it offers. Every bend in the trail seems to reveal another tucked-away waterfall, another crumbling pagoda foundation, or another twisted tree that has stood longer than any man. The mountain holds its secrets close, not out of pride, but out of patience. It does not demand reverence, it simply invites it. In Jiulong, time flows like the streams, softly, persistently, eroding stone not through violence but through persistence. To walk through it is to understand the power of stillness, the strength of roots, and the quiet majesty of a place where dragons sleep beneath moss, and every echo feels like it has traveled 1,000 years just to reach your ears. This video is for educational or entertainment purposes only, and information provided in the video may be incorrect. If you enjoyed the video, consider subscribing to the channel and like the video.